Welcome to my channel people, hope you enjoy. Author link will be on the description, make sure to check it out. Today's the day. Tenko looked over at Izuku as he said that, stood beside him in front of the imposing sight before them, and placed a gloved hand on his shoulder. You okay, Izuku? You've said that twice now. Huh. Why yeah, I'm okay. Izuku swallowed, taking a deep breath and nodding to Tenko, inwardly cursing that he couldn't keep the wobble of trepidation and excitement out of his voice. I never thought I'd make it here. Not after everything growing up. You'd have found a way to be a hero whatever happened, Tenko said, squeezing his best friend's shoulder. I know you too well to know that anything would have stopped you from getting here. What he means, Setsuna said, stood on Izuku's left and shooting a teasing glance at her cousin and his best friend, is you're too stubborn to have been stopped anyway. Hey. Izuku looked at Tenko for validation, only to see his best friend smirking in his usual dark way. Don't say that, it's mean. She's not wrong. Tenko shook his head, shaggy blue hair shaking like a Medusa. Although I was trying to be nice. There's no way any other character class would fit you. And I'm sure they'll see it too. I hope so. Izuku gulped, putting his hands into the pockets of his green hoodie. I just hope we all get in. I don't know what I'd do without either of you. Setsuna cracked her knuckles, as she looked up too with a grin. We'll get in, Zuzu. We'll show them all we can be the next best heroes. They're not gonna be ready for our party, Tenko agreed, balling his hands into fists now and nodding with a determined look. What is it they say here? Go beyond. Izuku looked up at the gates in front of him, at the logo he had dreamed of seeing his entire life, and nodded with determination. Finally, he got to say it. Plus Ultra. Today was the day he tried to get into UA. Time had flown since Izuku, Tenko and Setsuna had found out that they had been accepted to attend the entrance exam at UA, one of the greatest days of Izuku's life to date. The few days between their letters coming and the big day itself had been packed with preparation. Inko and Setsuna's mom had insisted that they threw a proper party with a massive meal on the night they all knew, but Izuku had no intention of letting the chance he had dreamed of for years slip by him. Every little opportunity he could find to hone his skills, to practice the fluidity of switching between the blasts of his Air Force quirk and integrating the pull of the steel quirk into it seamlessly, he had taken. Every chance he and Tenko had to scour the internet for hero videos and research on the school, he had made the most of, and every time Setsuna had come up with some crazy idea for teamwork moves that usually resulted in shenanigans, this was Setsuna's planning, after all, he had relished. He was not going to miss out on getting into UA, the alma mater of All Might, the almost holy birthplace of modern heroics. Not on his watch. Inko had dropped them off at the entrance of the school, high on the hills above Musudafu and shrouded in dense forest that had at times overgrown the old roads up to Japan's finest hero academy. The tidal wave of proud tears from his mother as she watched her son and his friends stand outside one of the most prestigious gates in the world hadn't drowned Izuku, miraculously, and even more miraculously he hadn't cried yet himself. But this was UA. The one and only UA. As terrified as he was that he may not pass the exam, he was going to savor every moment of being here. It would always have a place in his fanboy heart, after all. Needs a lick of paint. The brief, passing thought jolted Izuku out of his reverie before he could descend into a cascade of hero-inspired muttering, or pull a notebook out of his backpack where he had stashed the costume made for him by Inko and Tenko. As jarring at the thought was, it wasn't wrong. UA's iconic tower stood firm, early morning sunlight glinting orange off of the windows and throwing long shadows across the grounds, but the outside wall where they stood had seen much better days. A sign of the times, perhaps, that graffiti and angry anti-hero sentiments seemed to clutter up every available inch of the beige concrete wall outside. It appeared that if UA had ground staff, they hadn't been brave enough to venture outside to scrub the slogans off, or replace the heads on the once white marble statues which stood timeless guard over the entrance, or clear out the weeds that had started to sprout through the slabs of the pavement in front of the massive gate. Izuku was not deterred. Nothing in his wannabe hero heart would be. Of course he was upset to read what some people had daubed on the walls of this temple to heroism, of course reading the outcry and anger of people who wrote messages like, "A tyrant with a cape is not a hero," in jagged kanji for all the world to see, made him wish the world was a better place. But this was why he was here, why Tenko and Setsuna were here. He wanted to be the sort of hero people could be proud of, so that people wouldn't be splashing their rage in smeared red paint on those hallowed walls, like signatures of blood objecting to the new age of heroes. He swallowed, and for just one moment in the middle of it, he was numb to the rest of the world. All that mattered was the gate in front of his big green eyes, the gateway to a brighter future, and the words he was about to murmur in a hushed tone under his breath, the words that just felt right. I am here. Say, Setsuna wondered aloud, her head tilted in confusion as she stared at the gate. Wasn't someone supposed to come and let us in? I don't see anyone else here, so they've gotta have been let in, right? Tenko stepped up before Izuku could say anything and walked up to the gate, somehow the one piece of the outside wall which had survived unblemished from the resentment of UA's neighbors. For a moment the decay user ran a gloved hand over the painted blue concrete, and for some reason Izuku's brain flashed with an image of the gateway corroding in Tenko's hands, before he spotted something and stopped. There's an intercom here. Wanna ring the doorbell and find out what it does? Somehow that makes me feel like a kid on Halloween, Setsuna said, raising an eyebrow. It's like we're gonna ask them trick or treat. Tenko smirked. You can chuck your head at them for the trick if you like. Oh sure. That'll definitely get us into UA with a good first impression. Whatever. Everyone saved their progress. Izuku shook his head with a little laugh. Tenko would never change. Just ring the bell, Tenko. Geez, someone's impatient. Reaching forward with his gloved hand, Tenko dusted it off. Quite a lot had accumulated and thumbed the lone switch, stepping back as he heard the buzz. It was a good job he did. Held tilde low there. Screamed a voice so energetic the owner undoubtedly drank espresso like water, and the wave of sound that rolled out of the small speaker nearly laid Izuku and his friends flat on their backs. Welcome to UA High, little listeners. Izuku blinked, managing to calm his racing heart a few paces as his inner fanboy kicked in. Is that present mic? Tenko grumbled, shaking his head as if to clear his ears of the ringing. Nobody else screams like that in the world. If you're hearing my lovely voice, continued the voice, and somehow the inflection of his tone alone managed to make it perfectly clear that he had winked, then you must be prospective UA students here for the exams. That are Girl Scouts bringing cookies, Setsuna snarked behind them, not missing the opportunity for a joke. Cookies always go down well, but I'm afraid it'll take more than that to get through our entrance exam, Miss Tokage. The response from present mic nearly floored Izuku more than the initial outburst of voice over the speakers. He can hear us. And see you too, young Mr. Midoriya. As if to demonstrate, a buzz from overhead signified the wiggling of a security camera covered in paint and rust, that had looked utterly defunct until a moment ago. How else do you think I'm letting only loyal subscribers through these gates? Suppose I should have expected it from UA, Setsuna said with a wry smile, waving to the camera. No cookies for you, present mic. Sorry. Oh my god. Izuku began reaching for his backpack and his notebook, his eyes wide with excitement. It really is present mic. I can't believe you're still teaching at UA. I love your radio show. I'm a huge MRMPH. Out of a sense of mercy to the teacher and knowing what was coming, Tenko had clamped a gloved hand over Izuku's mouth to silence him before they lost a whole day. Yeah, he's a fanboy, sorry about that. He's gonna probably beg you to sign his notebook when we get in, he's relentless. On the other end of the speaker, present mic chuckled. No sweat, Tenko Shimura. I'll sign whatever he wants when we're done with the exams. As Izuku squealed underneath Tenko's glove, he continued. You three are actually some of the last to arrive, and I can see on my north camera our last caller of the day is just coming up on the door. You might wanna hold her so she doesn't panic she's late. Then I can let you all through together. You can thank me later for helping you make friends, yeah. Another caller. Izuku spun to face north. Then it's another applicant. This is great, He trailed off, frowned, squinted, as the person came in sight. No way. Huh. Who's the NPC? Tenko turned and stared in the same direction, a stunned look passing on his face as he caught sight of the clothes they were wearing and recognized them. You're kidding. Is that? Aw man. Setsuna chuckled to herself as the individual sprang towards them, light on her feet as she ran and with such a familiar smile on her face. You've really gone and done it now, Zuzu. Well, isn't this cute? Hey Izuku. Izuku was speechless for a second as his brain caught up with the sight in front of him, as she skidded to a halt beside the group and beamed at him with that fanged smile he couldn't mistake for anyone else. Himiko. What are you doing at UA? I know, right? She clicked her heels together as if saluting and grinned wildly at him. I can't believe I got a place at the exam either. Hey, I kinda left it late to apply. But it all worked out. Well, look at this, my listeners all know each other already. Present Mike chimed in from the PA. I feel like a proud parent. Welcome to UA, Miss Toga, yeah. Hell yeah. Himiko punched the air beside Izuku, the enthusiasm of Mike apparently infectious, before a mock look of shock passed over face. Don't tell me I'm the last one here. You all waited for little old me. I thought you might want some friends to come in with. Crackled the voice of the hero and teacher. I didn't know you already knew him even better. No reason to keep you all waiting outside now. The gate buzzed now, and with the clanking of machinery which sounded at least 100 years too old for the job it was doing, it swung open to reveal the campus on the other side. You'll wanna head straight up the main drive, keep going past that fountain and the fallen tree, and head into the main building. From there, it's the second door on your right, with the big old UA logo painted orange on it. One of my lovely colleagues will be there to greet you and help me explain the exam when I get in there. She can't wait to meet you all. Go beyond, kids, and welcome to UA High. I'll see you in your exams. Present Mike out. With a final burst of feedback, the voice of the man that gave sound technicians across the world nightmares cut out, and left Izuku and Co standing stunned with a grinning Himiko in front of the long drive up to the main college building. Izuku wasn't blown away by the view though, by the spectacular colors of the trees as they lined the path, by the crystal clear water that danced on the fountain halfway up the path. He was blown away by the company besides him and his group, the girl who had arrived at the last minute. Himiko. He walked through the gate behind her as she sprang through, humming to herself with her cardigan flying out behind her like a cape. How? What? Why? I'll ask, for my broken cousin, Setsuna interrupted, digging a detached elbow into his side as she and Tenko followed. How did you end up applying here? From all you told us. I thought you didn't like heroes. I still don't. Huh? Tenko asked, confused at the immediate and blunt response from the blonde girl. Then why? Because of Izuku. Himiko spun to face him, and Izuku was taken aback for a second by the smile on the blonde girl's face. It wasn't the toothy grin of her usual self, the mocking look. It was small, and framed with a vivid blush on her cheeks as yellow eyes met green. You always kept saying about how you wanted to be a better hero than the others, and I wanna see what you can do. But, it's more than that. You told me when that Yakuza came after us that I could be one too. Nobody has ever told me that. She blinked, and wrapped her arm through his to cling to his side as they continued to walk. Izuku felt his own face flushing red at the feel of her on his arm. If you believe in me that I could be one, with no hesitation, no doubt I could be a hero, then I'm gonna try. I'm gonna do what I can to help you, Izuku. And make you proud. Izuku heard a squeal from Setsuna behind him which he did his best to ignore. You don't have to do anything like this to make me proud, but, for what it's worth, that's amazing, Himiko. You really did help us out, so if you wanna become a hero with us. He smiled at her, and his heart leapt a little as the blush widened. Then I can't wait to do this with you too. Her eyes gleamed with something, a sense of pure joy. They're not gonna know what hit him, Izuku. Doesn't it warm your heart, Tenko? Izuku looked behind him at Setsuna's voice to see that his cousin had wrapped her own arm through Tenko's as they walked, one hand dramatically clutched to her chest as if overcome with emotion. Shish, shut up guys. Young love. Setsuna cried, with an exaggerated flourish. Star-crossed lovers reunited at last, but wait, is there a twist? Will they have to face each other for a place at this established school? Oh, the horror. He wasn't flustered until you pointed it out, Tenko groaned, trying his best to shut the reptile-loving girl up as Izuku and Himiko both went practically crimson. I didn't sign up for this shit today. Himiko. Yes sir. Don't call me that. Are you ready for this today? I know you didn't train as much as we did when we were in that warehouse. And yet I still saved your ass from that Yakuza, she replied, sticking her tongue out at him. I've got this. Right answer. Tenko nodded, a determined look suddenly on his face. We can all do it, and whatever happens, we stick together, got it? We'll show them what we're made of. Tenko. As he and Himiko came to a stop outside the big glass door at the front of the main building, Izuku took a moment to close his eyes and breathe, grateful for his friend's interruption to steady him and get him back on track to do the best he could. He turned to his best friend and smiled. Thank you. Anytime. Small Might. Izuku tried not to laugh and failed. I told you I'm not using that as a hero name. For just a moment he opened his eyes and looked at the little crew they had formed, standing on the front doorstep of Ua, the wide-eyed and bouncing Himiko, the self-assured smirking Setsuna, the determined and resolute Tenko, and him, smile on his face ready to face whatever they threw at him. Look how far they had come and what they could do. Time to show Ua just what they'd be getting. Are you ready, everyone? Hell yeah. Born ready, Zuzu. Let's show them what we can do. Alright. He nodded to himself to steel his nerves, straightened himself, and pushed the door forward, his inner fanboy jumping for joy at the sight of the famous halls and the giant class doors with the inimitable logo of the world's most celebrated heroics institution. The world had changed drastically in his lifetime, and society's opinions on heroes had been battered and bruised after years of failures, cuts, legislative rollbacks and negative headlines. The world no longer had the symbol of peace, the most famous graduate of this remarkable institution, and Ua itself had gone reclusive and private in the face of hostile attempts to take control of it for a supposed greater good. But this was the Ua of his dreams still, polished and ready to teach the next generation of heroes as it always had done, and now he could realize every single dream he had ever had. He stared up in awe at the school's corridors as his friends filtered in behind him. His breath was taken away by it all. The photographs of famous alumni winning their sports festivals, pictures of its most famous graduates and illustrious staff in their finest moments of their hero careers. It was everything he had ever hoped for. Wow, this place really is plus ultra. I'm glad you still think so, a female voice called out, and Izuku turned to see a black-haired woman with glasses leaning out of the door to the classroom where they would all be gathering. In her dark gray blazer and skirt, with a purple shirt and school tie on, she looked the epitome of professional and cool. We've had to change a few things around here, but it's still something that takes your breath away every day you walk in the front door. Hey. Setsuna's eyebrows shot up in recognition. You're Midnight, right? I didn't know you taught here. She shot the group a coy smile, and Izuku's eyes widened as he realized he had somehow missed the infamous R-rated hero standing right in front of him, one of Japan's most recognizable and revolutionary heroines of the modern era. Teaching them at Ua. Surprise, honey. It's my true love besides my hero work, being a teacher. The passion of you youngsters, the fire within you to do the right thing. She shuddered, and Izuku recognized the hungry look he had seen on her face on countless hero commercials and post-fight videos. I wouldn't miss teaching here for the world. R-rated, huh? Tenko looked at the teacher, seemingly unfazed by the slightly flirtatious edge in her tone. That costume's kinda PEGI-12, if you ask me. What, do they not let you get away with much in a school? Oh, I don't know about that. Midnight smirked at him, and Izuku gulped as he saw the fire flash in her eyes. I can always get the whip out if you'd prefer me to put you in your place, gamer boy. Rather against the survival instinct of most, Tenko laughed, as Setsuna backed away from him slightly. Like you actually have a whip. Wordlessly, Midnight brushed her fingertips at the buttons of her shirt, then delved a hand inside between her breasts. When she withdrew her hand, lo and behold, there was a rather well-kept flogger whip in her hands. With a flick of her wrist, a snap rang out in the corridor as she flicked it in the direction of Tenko, who jumped back with a squawk and snapped straight up to attention in response. Gripping both ends of the whip with authority now, Midnight's eyes were full of mirth. She had clearly enjoyed being challenged. Good boy. I knew you'd get the picture. Setsuna chuckled, nudging Tenko with an elbow. You have the survival instincts of a lemming, dude. Sometimes I just don't know what I see in you. Oh my, young romance among my students. The speed at which Midnight switched from sadistic enjoyment to shooting looks of adoration over Tenko and his cousin took Izuku by surprise. How exciting. You'll have to tell me more later. Any time. Setsuna grinned a toothy grin. You're one of my biggest idols, Miss Midnight. It's a pleasure to meet ya. Figures, the way she flirts with me, Tenko muttered under his breath, at a volume only Izuku could pick up on. I'm flattered, Miss Tokage, Midnight replied, stashing her whip away. I'll do my best to live up to it as your teacher, provided you get in, of course. UNEMURI. The shout from behind Midnight was deafening even without a quirk being activated, and Izuku's eyes widened at the unmistakable sight of the voice hero, present Mike, sidling up to join Midnight. While a few heroes tried to rock leather jackets and cool sunglasses, nobody else combined it with a giant blonde tuft of hair that rose like a gelled-up cliff to pierce the heavens. Are we gonna spend all day chatting outside, or are we gonna get this party started? We've got 20 kids to examine and only one day to do it, ya dig? Wait, Izuku asked, thrown by that last comment. What do you mean, 20 to examine? What happened to the others? Midnight threw present Mike what could only be described as an old-fashioned look, and sighed. You heard right from my loudmouth friend. Hey. But I'll explain when we're in. She paused as present Mike scribbled something on a clipboard he was holding, which appeared to be some sort of register, and then gestured to the open door. If we're all here, we'll start now. I hope you're ready. Izuku tried not to gulp at her tone as he and his friends were ushered into the classroom, but as heads turned towards them and other students chimed their greetings, the little part of his personality which appreciated quirks in all their forms soon overruled any other emotion, and in his excitement he didn't quite know how to even begin to describe just how cool some of these other students looked. His eyes flirted from a girl with pink skin and horns, waving at them from besides a guy with a wide grin and spiky red hair, to another girl whose whole head was covered in a writhing mass of vines for hair, to the stoic young man sat on a desk with the jet black head of a raven, and even to someone who appeared to be completely invisible, only identifiable due to the t-shirt and skirt she was wearing. They were the distinctive ones, but even so, Izuku could tell he was surrounded by young people with power at their fingertips. This wasn't just a class of youngsters who wanted to change the world, this was a class that could. He waved awkwardly to the pink-skinned girl and her redhead friend as he and Himiko slid into seats at the back of the room, Setsuna resting her elbows on his shoulders and her chin in his messy green hair. Tenko scoffed at them and leaned against the wall, lounging as present Mike and Midnight made their way to the front. Midnight coughed, and in a moment she had the attention of the room. Izuku had half been expecting Mike to yell at everyone. Good afternoon. Glad to see you've all taken interest in being heroes. She gestured elegantly to herself. My name is Namuri Kayama and I'll be one of your assessors for the exam today. With a wink, she added, but you may know me better as Midnight. It's a pleasure to meet you all. Just in front of him, Izuku heard a boy mutter to another person. Well, the R-rated hero is still teaching. He looked at the speaker, a blond boy with wide eyes and a sarcastic smirk on his face, muttering to a skinny young man with spiky black hair held up by a bandana. Bandana boy chuckled, his feet up on a chair in front of him. Hey. Still don't get how she's appropriate for a school. Midnight coughed again, slightly more pointedly this time, and Izuku resisted the urge to laugh as the boys shut up immediately. It wasn't just Tenko she had the better of. On behalf of Principal Nezu and the rest of the staff at UA, I'm grateful to you all for coming. We appreciate that since a few years ago, UA has taken itself out of the public spotlight, and we know that there is significant pressure on young students to attend elsewhere. In spite of this, you have all applied, and made it through our application process. Present Mike winked at the gathered students, and spread his arms wide. Good job on the two, little listeners. You're the only ones who made it here, after all. Eh? Setsuna asked, in a whisper only Izuku could hear. What does he mean by that? Present Mike appeared to read her mind. Normally you all would be the first of a few classes of students we would assess, and pick from that group who we want to take forward. In the past we would have matches against training robots, or team exercises we would have a little view of. In times like these though, we've gotta think outside the box, you get me? So we don't get robots. Himiko trailed off, and Izuku was alarmed to see some of the color rush from her face. Oh no. We've changed the test this year, Midnight continued, to reflect that we as a school can no longer afford to run a training program for the numbers we had before. Instead of examining over 200 students for 40 places, you 20 will be the only students we pick from this year. Excuse me. Before the class could kick off, a boy shot up in the front row, ramrod straight, and he appeared to chop the air as he spoke. You say that you will pick from the 20 students assembled here to make a class. Do I take it to mean some of us won't make it into your class? Midnight's smirk was evil all of a sudden. Quote. That's right. But UA has always had classes of 20. Surely. These are troubled times, listener, present Mike interrupted, as the boy sat down abruptly out of deference to the teacher. We've gotta make sure we're getting the best of the best, you hear me? This is UA, after all, dear students. Midnight's aura had turned sadistic. As a dear friend of mine would say, if you can't give it your all, you shouldn't be here. Go beyond, plus ultra, right. You heard it from her. Plus ultra all the way, yeaaah. Do you wanna tell them how it goes? Midnight asked her fellow teacher with a wink, while I go and set myself up. Sure thing, Nimuri. Present Mike, for some reason unknown to Izuku, shot her finger guns as she walked out of a door to the back of the classroom marked A, and left with the widest smirk on her face. This year we aren't fighting robots, or showing off on big stage battles. Midnight loves it intimate, so we're getting up close and personal with a quirk assessment presentation. Bet you didn't see that coming, huh? Quirk assessment. Himiko murmured, so faintly next to Izuku, and he was confused. Why was she now trembling? Here's how it works. When I call your name, 2 of you at a time will go to the back of the class and go through the magic doors of destiny over there. Present Mike was hyping it up as best as he could to a class of very uncertain students. Midnight will assess half of you through door A, and a special assessor from outside of UA will do the rest through door B. You'll have 5 minutes to show off your power and what you can do with it, and show us why you deserve to be a hero student at UA. The rest is up to you, my listeners. Are you readyyyy? Stony silence from a bunch of stunned and slightly petrified teenagers met the scream of their host with the most volume, and to his credit Present Mike didn't bat an eyelid. It's okay, tough crowd, we'll get more into it as we go. Anyway, random selections for this one, not alphabetical, so first up. Izuku leaned forward in anticipation. Abara Shiozaki. The vine-haired girl stood up and bowed her head, an aura of complete calm on her face. Yes, sir. I heard on the grapevine it's room A with Midnight for you. Shiozaki's stoic face didn't budge despite the awful pun, and she moved off towards the back of the room. And let's see, first up for our special guest assessor. Tenko Shimura. You're the oldest applicant here, so go prove age is just a number, MK. Tenko rolled his eyes, and pushed off from the back of the wall. As he stopped at Izuku, he offered out one gloved hand to Izuku in a fist. Guess this is it, huh? I'm about to unlock a whole new skill tree, or lose all my lives. Izuku made a fist of his own to bump against Tenko's glove. You're gonna do great, Tenko. Go show them what you're made of. Plus ultra, right. He swept his blue hair back and grinned at Izuku. I'll show 'em all. As Tenko dipped through door B with a nod to Setsuna, Izuku breathed out. Okay. I guess we have some time to prepare for. Himiko whirled up out of her chair all of a sudden and disappeared out of sight. Huh. Himiko. She's. Setsuna looked stunned. She did not look happy. Where do you think she's? Izuku stood up. I'm going after her. Huh. What? Izuku. What gives? She's upset about something here, and the reason she's here is because I told her she could try. Izuku clenched a fist and made up his mind. Whatever it is, I've got to try to help. Izuku, she might not listen. She's not talked to us about stuff before, about her guardian or her quirk, maybe it's not our business. But maybe if it becomes our business we can help. Izuku took off towards the door, ignoring the looks from his cousin and others in the class as he yelled over his shoulder. Meddling in others' business is the essence of a hero, Setsuna. Luckily for Izuku, as he took off out of the classroom door and shut it behind him, he didn't have to look far for Himiko. The blonde girl had fled only so far as the main entrance lobby, where she had crumpled into a heap against the wall on the opposite side, and lifted her head up as he came flying out of the door. Huh. Izu. Hey, it's okay. He scooted over across the hallway and slid down to sit beside her, offering an arm to sling around her shoulder and bring her in for a hug. I'm here now. Despite the fact that her eyes were wide and a small tear had formed in the corner, Himiko snorted and leaned into his hug. You're coming after me, quoting All Might. You're such a dork. I'm serious, I'm not going anywhere. Not until I can make you feel better. Izuku, She lifted her head to look at him, and he didn't flush at how close they were. I'm sorry, maybe I'm not cut out for this. But you are, Himiko. He squeezed her shoulder with his hand. You saved me and Tenko from that Yakuza. I know you can do this. It's not that, Her head fell. It's just. Is it about your quirk? His blunt question surprised her nearly as much as it surprised him, and her head shot up. What? He looked down at the floor, not making eye contact. I know you've always shied away from telling us when we practiced with ours. And now we're here at UA and they want us all to show off. I kinda guessed it might be to do with that. Himiko seemed to slump in his hug, and clearly she felt there was no reason to deny it. I'm that obvious, huh? Hey, it's not that. You're always really honest with us about anything, which sometimes makes me a mess because you can be far more open than we can. Your quirk is one of the things you don't feel that way about. I guess. I'm not gonna push you to say. He squeezed his arm tighter around her. You have your reasons, whatever it is for saying. I want you to be whatever you want to be, but I'm not gonna do anything to upset you. If you want to tell me what it is, or even why you don't want to say, I'll listen, but, he nodded. If I have to sit out here with you and stay like this until you're happier, I will. For a moment he saw a blush form on her face and despite everything he couldn't help but smile, but it passed in the blink of an eye. For what seemed like an age, he just sat there in silence, feeling her breathe in and out and letting her get herself steady. He wasn't going to force anything from her, not one of his crew, one of his friends. Izuku. Himiko seemed to stabilize herself for a question, and when it came out her voice was as low as he'd heard it in a while. What if people would hate my quirk? Hate it? He frowned. Why would people hate it? All my life. Himiko wavered, but then she seemed to make up her mind as one of her hands squeezed his hand on her shoulder, and she soldiered on. All my life, everyone who learned my quirk has told me I was a monster. They told me I was evil, tried to change me. Nobody believed I could do what I want to do except my guardian and my big bro. She tilted her head to look up at him, and Izuku was taken aback by how deep and soulful those feline yellow eyes of her had become. Izuku, you believe in me. You say the sweetest things I've heard and you're nothing but cute to me. But, can you still say that? Even knowing I have a monster's quirk, can you be true and tell me that you like me, that you believe in me? I can and I will. She raised her eyebrows as he responded. And no hesitation. I don't need to think about it, Himiko. He squeezed her hand back. I believe in you, and that's final. But my quirk. Nobody is defined by their quirk, Himiko. Izuku remembered the things that his mother had said, all the time ago when they first learned the truth of his power and what he could do. What their quirk or how it works, that doesn't matter. You could have a quirk that people think is good used by the worst villain, and it wouldn't matter. The quirk isn't important, it's the person who uses it and what they want to do. I don't know what your quirk is, but. Izuku tilted his head sideways, and leant his head against hers. I believe in you. For what seemed like an age, Himiko was quiet and her eyes were closed. Okay. Yeah. She nudged his head with her own and turned to look at him, seeming to steel herself in a mighty effort that seemed to steady her breathing. Izuku. I wanna tell you something. About you. Yeah. Himiko looked down for a second. I'm gonna tell you about me, and about my quirk, and what it did to me, but only if you promise one thing. Anything. Okay. Himiko moved his hand off her shoulder and squeezed it in her own. If you hear it, and it changes how you feel about whether you believe in me, tell me. If you think I'm not cut out for being a hero, then say. I trust you. More than I've trusted anyone in a while. So I need to hear it from you, okay? Izuku wouldn't say what was in his heart, that he would never tell her that he didn't believe in her, or that she wasn't right for this. She didn't need to hear that, in case she thought he wasn't being honest. If she wanted to talk, then it had to be on her terms and she had to know she was being listened to genuinely. Okay. I promise, Himiko. She took a deep breath, blinked those yellow eyes and looked at him, and Izuku saw that the look on her face was something more serious than he'd ever seen. But this wasn't anger or rage that had made her serious, there was something deep and painful on her face, a sense of sadness and resignation. Whatever she was about to say was going to hurt her. Okay, here goes. So you're the mini-boss for this quirk assessment, huh? Gotta say you're not what I was expecting. Whatever Tenko had been expecting in the next room, it was not the impeccably well-dressed man with the slicked and combed-over green hair. He didn't look like a teacher, with a very fancy suit and a weird spotty tie, and he certainly didn't look like a pro hero. He was exactly the sort of person Tenko would have expected to have seen standing on the train for his morning commute, or sat in the last seat in the row reading the headlines in a newspaper. In fact, as Tenko had walked into the assessment room, the man had been scouring the columns of today's paper and marking it up with, bizarrely, an All Might-themed pen. The man behind the desk pocketed his pen, and began to neatly fold the newspaper without looking up. I presume you were expecting a recognized teacher of Uahai when you walked through this door. Something about the man's tone set Tenko on edge slightly. He hadn't asked it as a question, he was absolutely certain he knew how Tenko was thinking, and while he was correct, something about that made him wary. If you're saying that, then you're not a teacher here. In that case, why are you here to test me? Good question, the man responded, not at all sounding offended by the confrontational tone Tenko had taken. I am here at the personal invite of Principal Nezu. You will note that this year the student intake at this school is substantially reduced. The caliber of applications has diminished, but even among those deemed worthy of further examination, UA wished to make sure of certain qualities among their applicants. As such, I was invited to assess these qualities and give my second opinion. And I'm one of the ones who has extra qualities. Tenko grinned, with no humor behind it. This man's bluntness was getting to him. I guess I should thank you for the special treatment. Perhaps. Although you may wish to hold back until you are certain you've passed. There was absolutely no humor in the man's voice as he scribbled a note on a piece of paper which looked like a report. While my duties as a pro hero include combat, I specialize in analysis and investigation, and I leave no stone unturned. Forgive me if, in being forensic, you feel somewhat uncomfortable by my analysis. I assure you I only mean to learn the truth, Mr. Shimura. Analysis. Tenko ignored the emphasis the man put on his family name, and paused. He had just put some of the pieces together. Hey, wait, is something the matter? I think know who you are. Tenko frowned, taking a good look at the man as he steepled his fingers and looked down at the paper report in front of him. Izuku talks about you, I've seen you in his movie collection and on his merchandise. You're the sidekick, aren't you? All Might's former partner. Izuku. The man looked at a separate sheet of paper, and nodded. Izuku Midoriya, your friend, another applicant here today. That's him. He's an All Might fanboy. Tenko snorted to himself. All of his nerding out rubbed off on me after all. It would seem that way. If your friend is an All Might fanboy, then I'm sure I will have appeared in his video collection at some point. The man stood up and looked Tenko in the eyes, piercing yellow meeting flashing red. Forgive me, Tenko Shimura, for not introducing myself properly. My name is Sir Night-Eye. I'm here to see what the future holds for you. Izuku Midoriya, Himiko Toga, Setsuna Tokage. Aged 15. Tenko Shimura. Aged 17. Namuri Kayama, Midnight, and Hisashi Yamada, present mic. Aged 30. Mirai Sasaki, Sir Night-Eye. Aged 38. The mats they were fighting on were supposed to be soft, but that didn't lessen the impact when he was slammed to the floor by the massive, flaming palm that had struck him in the chest and lifted him off his feet in a monstrous strike. Better. Katsuki growled, gritting his teeth against the pain that was coursing against his ribs, as he looked up into the eyes of his assailant. How the hell was that any better than the last? I went down in 15 seconds. Previously it was 10. The palm on his chest was lifted and the flames flickering on the forearms of his attacker simmered down from the intense levels they had been at during the fight. Progress may be small, but it is progress. Katsuki's own forearms were starting to ache, and as he pushed himself upright he winced at the sting in his palms from overuse of his quirk. Damn it, you put me on the ground every time we do this within the first few hits. How do you? I'm going to stop you before you start complaining that you aren't the strongest one around anymore, Bakugo. The giant of a man looked down at him and made no effort to offer him a hand up. You're telegraphing. Telegraphing. The hell does that? It means you're making moves that are too obvious for me not to pick up on. There was no trace of humor on his mentor's face, but to his relief Katsuki didn't see a sense of disappointment. He had to be doing something right. You're fighting me. You're a 15-year-old boy with one fight under your belt and no field experience, going up against the pro hero with the highest number of villain takedowns of all time. Do you think I've not seen any of your moves before? I'm predictable. Katsuki paused, hating the level of uncertainty that crept into his voice as he asked that. He'd had the strongest quirk in the whole of Aldera Junior High by miles, whatever that damn Deku had to say about it, and he'd worked for years since the death of All Might to train himself up so that he could outmuscle whatever came in front of him. Boxing, Muay Thai, Jiu-Jitsu, classes which had all been welcome distractions from the world around him and stepping stones to help him on his path to be stronger than even All Might himself. Or so he had thought. Now, it seemed he was just predictable. His mentor frowned, fiery eyebrows scrunching, and stood firm. If you want me to spell it out for you, I will. You always start a fight by trying to land the first blow, and you led with a right hook. You try to use your quirk to gain the high ground over an attacker, and you overextend yourself by doing so. Huh. To your credit, there is some hope. His attacker turned his flaming back on him and strode across to the other side of the mat as if preparing for another round. I can see you've taken classes, but you know enough to restrain yourself from slipping into routine combinations. And considering how your quirk works, you power up the more desperate you become. Who are you calling desperate? Oh, you're not. Then show me. Endeavor turned and planted himself in a combat stance, a vicious smirk on his face. Or is 15 seconds the best you can manage, future number one? Oh, he couldn't take that. I'll show you. The dojo Endeavor had taken him to was one Katsuki had never heard of before, which surprised him considering that it was only 2 or 3 blocks away from Katsuki's own home. The walls were mostly plain except for a few posters advertising fight club meets for underground brawlers and vigilantes, and the place looked quite run down even before Katsuki and Endeavor had blasted huge gouges and scorch marks into the floor and walls. It absolutely wasn't the sort of place that Katsuki would have expected Japan's top hero to consider a perfect spot to train. Then again, until a few weeks ago Katsuki Bakugo hadn't even known that Endeavor lived just half a mile from him. Until a few weeks ago he had still hoped to get into UA. How times changed. Endeavor's training of him had been utterly brutal, uncompromising, and had begun at an intensity that hadn't dropped no matter what they were doing. Exactly as it should have been. In Katsuki's eyes he would not have agreed to be taken under Endeavor's wing if he was going to be treated like a child, and not pushed to go beyond his absolute limits. There was no vacuous ego building about Katsuki's strong explosion quirk, no blind eye willing to look the other way whenever any faults became visible. Endeavor was hard on him, relentlessly so, and Katsuki knew because of this that the flaming devil at the top of Japan's hero lists really did want him to surpass him. Endeavor raised one flaming eyebrow as his fists ignited, looking over Katsuki as he marched towards him, deliberately not charging at breakneck speed so he didn't get clotheslined again. Oh. You're approaching me. Katsuki growled at the ancient reference, the familiar spark of explosion popping in his palms as he strode towards the flame hero. You wanna treat me like a joke? I'll wipe the floor with you. What happened next was a blur to Katsuki and he still wasn't quite clear what had happened. He knew that he had feinted with his right arm, drawing it back as if to swing a punch knowing full well that Endeavor had read his starting move and would take the bait. At the same time, he brought up the left hand and blasted out the largest explosion that his aching palms could manage in a palm strike, at near point-blank range to his mentor's face, knowing full well that Endeavor didn't have time to dodge. His explosion was met with a blast of hellflame from Endeavor's neck and beard that overwhelmed the blast and sent it crashing sky-high, nearly putting a hole in the old ceiling. Endeavor moved with frightening speed which didn't match the size of the pro or his bulk, and before Katsuki knew it his left arm had been seized in a flaming fist the size of a bare paw. When someone tells you it's predictable to lead with your right, it's even more predictable to immediately then lead with your left. Bastard. Katsuki brought his right arm down now and smashed his palm against Endeavor's chest, feeling the thump as his right hand's explosion shook the man. Get off. With pleasure. Something about the man's tone gave him a split second of alarm before he was hefted and thrown across the mat, landing with a crunch on its very edge. He didn't have time to get his breath back before he felt the bulky pro land on his back and press a knee into his spine, his arms pinned to the floor by 2 fists wreathed in hellflame. Yield. Damn you. Yield. The flames intensified as Katsuki turned his mouth to the side and tried to bite at Endeavor's fist, pinning his right hand down, and for a brief moment Katsuki's sheer anger at being pinned nearly overwhelmed his self-preservation instincts to try to carry on the bite. You're done, Bakugo. Gragh. With a scream and the pop of explosions against the hardwood, Katsuki tapped his forehead against the floor. He wouldn't ever voice his submission, there was far too much pride in him to ever say that, but he'd been beaten, and read like a book in the process. 18 seconds. Another improvement. Damn it. Endeavor's mocking tone left Katsuki fuming and looking for an outlet. The number one hero had told Katsuki that he wanted to make him his apprentice, to mold him into his successor at the top of the pile, to give him the chance to prove that he was a hero no matter what the hero commission might say. Katsuki had to be strong. He had to prove to Endeavor that he was worth the investment and that he would be the greatest, that he would overcome being banned from UA and commission training to be a symbol of a new era. He wouldn't let it carry on like this. Something to say, Bakugo. Katsuki snarled, rolling onto his back to glare at his mentor as he stood there looking down at him with an unreadable expression. You fucking listen to me, Human Torch. I'm not giving up, you hear me? I don't care how many times you wanna slap me around, I'll bury you one day. Is that so? I'll show you. I'll blast every last one of you out of my way and become the number one. I'll be stronger than All Might ever was, and make all those scumbag villains in the world fear my name. You'll be lucky to last even 5 seconds against me then. Endeavor's stoic face cracked finally into a smirk wreathed with hellflame, and a gleam in his eyes which almost looked like pride. Good. You're exactly as I hoped you would be. The hell do you mean? Clearly it hurts you being beaten by me. Endeavor walked forward, each stride of his boot pounding against the hardwood floor. You're not humble. You're not dignified. You're outraged and hurt every single time you lose. If you're gonna tell me I need to work on that, then I'm walking out that damn door. And if I ever told you to change that, I'd walk out that door myself. Huh. Now that wasn't what Katsuki expected. Endeavor pulled him upright with ease and clamped a hand down on his shoulder. You don't just want to save people, you want to be number one. And if you want to be number one, you need to have drive and ambition. You want to beat every villain, save every civilian, be stronger than everyone else. Don't you ever let up on that. Katsuki looked up and tried not to flinch under the intensity of his mentor's gaze, fire from his beard and eyebrows causing Endeavor's eyes to shimmer. I'm not the sort of hero who will tell you not to beat yourself up if you fail. If you can't save a life, if someone gets away, I want it to eat away at you, to hurt you, and for you to get back up after that and work yourself to the bone to get back on track. That's what makes someone worthy of the top, not the ability to shrug off their failures, but the ability to carry them into every victory they ever have. Katsuki Bakugo, you have the same fire I see in myself. It's why I took you as an apprentice after you took the law into your own hands. You will beat yourself up for every opportunity you ever miss to beat a villain, to save someone, to not be the strongest you can be. Show me you can carry that into your victories, and you won't just be a good apprentice, my best sidekick. You'll be better than all of them. Katsuki felt the explosions crackle in his palms at the idea, something inside him roaring like a lion, and did the only thing he could do: grin at Endeavor like a feral animal waiting to be released into the wild. Just watch me. That's the spirit. Endeavor smirked back, but then some foreign emotion seemed to flicker over his mentor's face for a second. You might just be the one who lives up to my expectations, after all. Katsuki was perceptive enough to realize what that look was, and what he meant by that last comment. He wasn't stupid, he had seen the headlines. Your son didn't like the tough love then, huh? If Endeavor was fazed by his comment, he didn't show it. If by son you mean Shoto, then no. Shoto resented the quirk I had given him as much as he resented the changes I helped bring to the system. I haven't seen him since that day. So you trained your other son too? Natsuo, isn't it? Katsuki had sat through enough hero infomercials to know the ins and outs of one of the most famous families in Japan. Endeavor paused, blinked, and Katsuki realized that his mentor had misspoken, and was weighing up what he could say next. Quote. Not Natsuo. The significance of that comment was not lost on Katsuki. You have another son. Had to ya. He could have been stronger than me too, but he objected to my methods. To my vision. And then, he lost control. Endeavor nodded finally, and Katsuki realized that he had been trusted with something awful and something untold in being given this knowledge. He's not around anymore. Katsuki shuffled awkwardly, not knowing what to say. Damn it. Nobody knows, huh? Best keep it that way. Endeavor looked at him, and Katsuki felt the weight of years of secrets behind that gaze. I trust that with you I can finish what I tried with my sons, hence why I can say that. You will excel where they could not. But you will not tell anyone, or there will be no corner of this country dark enough that you can hide from me. I get it. Katsuki was half expecting the threat, and wasn't about to lose face by letting it intimidate him. Third time's the charm, huh? Endeavor huffed, the corner of his mouth turning up. Something like that. Yo, Endeavor. Finished beating the shit out of the new kid yet? A vein on Katsuki's forehead bulged at the sound of that fired-up voice from behind him. Not her. What the hell is she doing here? I think you might like the answer to that question, Endeavor replied cryptically, as he and Katsuki turned to face the newcomer, flaming green hair writhing around despite there being no breeze in the dojo. Burnin. I assume our designers finished what I asked for. You got it. Although if he's being a brat I don't think he deserves it. HRAGH. What is with you, bedhead? See. No need to be like that with me, Bomberman. Katsuki had gotten used to most things since he joined Endeavor's agency as the new hero apprentice, and the sidekicks were one of those things. Endeavor had over 30 sidekicks, all of whom were competent heroes who could have easily set up their own agency and gone pro in the days before the Hero Commission tightened their grip. Despite this, the literal hothead that was Mokami-ji, Burnin, was one sidekick he just couldn't get used to. She was loud and obnoxious and fired up as a default setting, and Katsuki fluctuated on an hourly basis between thinking she was the funniest one there and butting heads with her in sheer frustration. The loudmouth set his teeth on edge sometimes. One thing was for sure though. Katsuki absolutely didn't like the suggestion from Kido, one of the other sidekicks, that he was pretending to not like Burnin because they were the same person on the inside. He was nothing like her. He growled and forced himself to look at her stupid grinning face. Why did you even come here? Aren't you supposed to be over in Hosu for the next month? Burnin grinned at him and wrapped an arm over his shoulder, pulling him into a headlock of a hug. No dumbass, that's Anima. I've been working on something for you, orders of the boss. Get off me. Katsuki wrenched himself out of the headlock and glared at her. What do you mean, something for me? Burnin reached into the pockets of her gray jacket, the fire extinguisher she wore on her back clinking, and winked as she pulled two orange and black objects out. Every wannabe hero needs support items to max their potential, right? Think of these as a welcome present, Blasty. Katsuki was a little shocked by what he saw. What at first appeared to be black Kevlar gloves turned out to be gauntlets with a mounted black and orange box on the top, orange flame decals that matched the insignia worn by a number of the flaming sidekicks, as Burnin had named them. They looked sleek and chunky and not at all cumbersome, and Katsuki's eyes were drawn to the chrome muzzle that poked out of the end of each of the black boxes. They're for me. You will recall, Endeavor rumbled behind him, that my agency is sponsored closely by Detonarit, the support item company. I pulled a few strings to get you a welcome present. Katsuki took them from a grinning Burnin and slipped his hands in, feeling how well they fitted and how light the boxes were on top. After a second, he finally put two and two together. These are storage tanks. You did this for my quirk, huh? He's smarter than he looks. Burnin crowed, ignoring the angry twitch from Katsuki. Sweat storage so you can keep reserves up for use in a fight. Targeted shots using the muzzle or one big blast like a grenade if you wanna make a big bang. Pretty neat, huh? Huh. Katsuki echoed Burnin, but he couldn't contain the grin that spread on his face. Pretty handy. You're welcome. Endeavor nodded, clearly not expecting his new apprentice to say thank you. Your quirk, like mine, is indiscriminate and dangerous in its application. The potential for damage is catastrophic, although sometimes unavoidably so. By giving you gauntlets like these, I can at least afford you the choice to be precise, and make an impact where needed. Maybe you might escape some of the collateral damage headlines that keep chasing me around. Katsuki hadn't respected Endeavor when he agreed to become his apprentice. He had been incredibly angry with the Flame Hero when he had helped change society and allowed the worst among us a way in, and he was still pissed at how sore he was from being beaten up by the pro. But somewhere in there was a man who was giving him the chance to prove he could be number one, a man actively looking to make his chances better. Now, no matter how much he didn't want to feel that way, Katsuki couldn't help but respect the man a little. I'll add them into my costume when we get back to the agency. Endeavor's smile was small and fleeting, but it was there, as he turned and headed for the door. See that you do. We'll head back there now, anyway. I think we've done enough for today. How long did he last? Endeavor didn't turn to look at his grinning sidekick, as Katsuki and Vernon followed him to the exit of the dojo. Quote. 18. Vernon whistled through her teeth, and clapped a tense Katsuki on the back. Nice going, squirt. Anima and I didn't think you'd get past 10. Katsuki snarled. Bet you wouldn't last more than 10 against me, you damn sidekick extra. Oh, big talk for a kid with no license. Kami-ji. Vernon perked up as Endeavor's voice cut across their argument, seeing him stopped still at the door. Boss. Were you followed here? Nah, I came alone. Why do you? She trailed off as she looked through the door and saw who had gathered outside. Oh shit. Katsuki clenched his fists. Villains. Then he saw through a gap between Endeavor and his sidekick, and he realized what they were dealing with. Reporters. Lots and lots of news reporters. Another of the things Katsuki had just about got used to since joining the Endeavor agency was just how relentlessly pursued by the press they all were. Even before he had become number one, Endeavor had courted controversy for his manner towards civilians and collateral damage, and the press had swarmed to cover his darkest hours like feasting locusts. In a world without All Might, with all the changes to the hero system and the public backlash against a wide range of heroes, Endeavor had found himself the figurehead of a new world hated by many, and an even bigger target was painted on his back. Now every day seemed to be a new story about a failure in the system, an allegation against the flame hero, a new villain emerging, and they wouldn't stop following them. Katsuki had only encountered them a couple of times himself, and had been ignored in the background on those occasions as the hungry reporters descended on Endeavor hoping to bait him into a soundbite for their causes. That was half of the trouble with it all these days. Nobody knew who owned half of these stations or what their agendas were, whatever criticism they had about the state of society. Some of them seemed to actively contribute towards the decay, encouraging incidents and baying for blood, fear-mongering to generate the next story for their front pages. It seemed less about reporting the news, or giving people good headlines to look at, and more about finding the angle for attack. Not that Katsuki minded if the reporters left him alone. The incident at Tatuan Station with Mount Lady and Kamui Woods that led to him being banned from hero schools and being taken on by Endeavor had generated a lot of publicity. Against his better judgment, he had read some of the comments in the newspapers about his own actions, and he would sooner forget some of those reports. He knew what he had done was outside the law and was vigilantism. He didn't expect praise for it, but some had called him reckless, violent, dangerous, a criminal. All for trying to do the right thing. Unfortunately today it didn't look like they would be left alone. The reporters had seen movement behind the glass window in the door as Endeavor approached, and had spotted the trio instantly. Camera flashes were already going off, so much for a lucky escape. How the hell did they even know we were here? Vernon cried, looking wildly between the reporters and the looks of glee on their faces at cornering the number one hero and his crew. We haven't used this dojo in weeks. It doesn't matter how they knew, Endeavor growled, cutting her off immediately. They could have followed you, they could have spoken to the dojo owner in advance of me coming, someone could have posted something on the Hero Network. What matters is we don't give them what they want. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Katsuki didn't know if it was fear or admiration that drove her to about turn in tone so quickly, but there was something in the tone of Endeavor that held so much command that it had immediately reined in his most fiery and passionate sidekick. He was so strong you could even feel it in his voice, and whatever Bakugo's own opinions on the man, he couldn't help but be a little impressed. TCH. Leave the talking to you, right? I'm the one they're always after, so yes, Endeavor replied, clapping him on the shoulder. Just keep silent. While I regret that we cannot drive back to the agency, it's only a short walk. We'll be free of them before you know it. The door swung open in front of Katsuki before he had the chance to reply, and like a tidal wave the horde of press descended on Endeavor, Katsuki and Vernon. Endeavor, have you heard anything from your son? Will you be making repayments to the Onobusa family for the tragic death of their son yesterday? Endeavor, what's your comment on the Hero Commission's criticism of the pro-hero Kamui Woods? Are you concerned for Shoto Todoroki's whereabouts? Not even the blunt question about his wayward son broke Endeavor's composure. For a pillar of flame, Katsuki admired how cold he could be sometimes. Excuse me, everyone. It's been a long afternoon and we have a strategy meeting with the chief of police tonight, so put your questions and requests for interviews in writing to my agency. Someone will be in touch when we have the time to talk. That is all. Let us pass, now. More polite than he usually is, Vernon muttered conspiratorially to Katsuki, but it appeared that as their group walked off briskly in the direction of the agency, the reporters hadn't been deterred. The bulk of the group followed them, invading his space as they jabbed microphones towards Endeavor like swords, and Katsuki ground his teeth as he slouched behind Endeavor, trying not to pop off an explosion in his palms. Endeavor, will you be supporting Sir Nitai's investigations into the Yakuza? Do you have any shred of guilt for what happened to the Onobusa family? How much does the chairman of Detonate pay you to? Katsuki Bakugo, do you ever think you'll be a hero? Katsuki stiffened at the sound of his name and that cry, and stopped dead in his tracks. That voice, so passionate, so excited and yet asking such a harsh question as if it were normal, had silenced the rest of the reporters. Who the hell was that? That's my question to you, Katsuki. The crowd of reporters parted like the sea with murmurs of shock from the gathered reporters, and Katsuki came face to face with the voice that had called him out. The woman in question stood out among her peers, not least for her blue skin and lilac-purple hair swept back over her ears, but it was the look on her face that stunned Katsuki. Wide eyes and an even wider smile, as if somehow she was excited to meet him. Chitose Kazuki, from Shueisha Publishing. Do you ever think you'll be a hero? My apprentice is not answering questions, Endeavor said, striding in and tugging on Katsuki's sleeve. None of us are. And yet he makes me want to ask so many. Kazuki looked him up and down, and Katsuki noticed the murmurs from the other reporters, almost reverent in their tone now. Whoever she was known in their circles. I can't believe you're Endeavor's apprentice now, Katsuki. After everything that happened in Tetuan, this must be a lifeline for you. Katsuki growled now, feeling something crawl up his spine. There was something far too friendly about her tone and something scary about how much she seemed to know. Am I supposed to know who you are? Bakugo. Maybe not, but I know so much about you. Kazuki clapped. She actually clapped and beamed at him, oblivious to the frantic scrambling of the other reporters to take notes and pictures. Katsuki Bakugo, 15 years old, Aldera Junior High student until a month or so ago. Your power is explosion. You sweat nitroglycerin from your palms, right? How do you keep such a destructive power under control? Katsuki opened his mouth to bite back at her and tell her to piss off, but she was in full flow now. Maybe that power is why they were so quick to ban you from all the hero schools in Japan, after you destroyed those shops fighting the villain in Tetuan. And to think you've ended up still becoming a hero apprentice despite that. I can see the story now. Nowhere left to turn, nobody showing you faith, until you find Endeavor, a demon of destruction just like home, and yet you rise to become a hero despite how much they fear you. Leave him alone. Vernon cried, although she wasn't quick enough to plant herself between Katsuki and Kazuki. Hey. So tell me, Katsuki. Kazuki had gotten far too close to him now and looked at him with eyes wide with anticipation and a disturbing excited grin. The Hero Commission think you're too dangerous to be a hero. Are you really gonna be a great hero? That's enough. Endeavor barked, clearly having enough of the situation. Bakugo, we're leaving now. No. Even the fearless Endeavor flinched at the venom in that tone, and everyone except the excited Kazuki took a step back from Katsuki, who by now was vibrating with anger. Bakugo. You listen to me, now. It took every fiber of Katsuki's willpower to not launch into a tirade of swears at this woman who was intent to get under his skin, and had just managed to do it. She wanted a soundbite from him. He'd give her one. You wanna know why I did what I did at Tetuan? She smirked, and there was something wolf-like about the smile. I'm all ears, Katsuki. I did what I did because nobody else was doing anything to fix the real mess. He realized all of the other reporters had their attention on him now, including their cameras, but he just didn't care. There were 2 Hero Commission pro heroes there, and what did they do? Those bastards started a fight with the pro who had already caught the villain, and let the scumbag get back up. They wanted to fight each other for glory rather than beat the bad guy, so someone had to do something. And that someone was you. She asked, impishly. I didn't see anyone else there. He ignored the way the corners of her mouth turned up as his emotions spilled out. What was I supposed to do? Stand by and let the villain do what he wanted. That guy needed to be put down before he hurt more people, and the only person willing to do it was me. Katsuki took a moment to breathe, and what he had been bottling up for a number of weeks came pouring out. Yeah, I was a vigilante. Yeah, it's against the law. I'm not gonna bullshit you and say that what I did was completely right because I knew it was illegal and I still did it. I still would, because it's a stupid law to say that if you want to help someone, you can't. When we can't rely on the Hero Commission to keep us all safe, what are we supposed to do? The whispers became frantic among the reporters, and a couple seemed to check that their cameras were working. Kazuki just raised a delicate eyebrow. So you don't have confidence in the Hero Commission to keep people safe? Hell no, Katsuki snarled, ignoring the nudge of Burnin beside him. All Might kept people safe. All Might wasn't afraid to put his life in danger or go after the worst villains. He gave his life fighting the worst of all. The people were left with care more about politics and stamping on little people than being heroes. What kind of bastard pretends to be a hero when they can't even keep people safe from villains? When they won't keep them safe? So what would you say to the argument that the commission tried to keep people safe by banning you from becoming a hero? Kazuki looked fascinated by his answers. They said your powers are dangerous and that because you act outside the law, you are not fit to be a hero. As if they have any right to judge me. Katsuki pounded his chest. These people change the laws on collateral damage, and then because I'm strong they don't like it anymore. It's bullshit. I've worked for years and years to be even stronger than All Might, so I can be a hero and beat every villain that gets in my way. Don't try and tell me I don't have enough control to be a hero. The heart of a hero, with all that power, so inspiring to all those with dangerous abilities. Kazuki's eyes were almost glistening at his response, and that just seemed to anger him more. And what do you say to all those people out there with powers like you? All those people afraid they can't do anything because they're afraid what people may see when they use their abilities. Who cares what people might think? If you wanna do something for good and you've got a strong power, use it. And if you use it for evil. Katsuki lit up his palms and took great satisfaction in the fact that all of the reporters bar Kazuki stepped back from him. Then just know I'll hunt you down myself. He turned to look at the blue-skinned woman and sneered. How's that for your soundbite? Perfect. She beamed at him, and actually waved. Call me if you wanna talk more, Katsuki. Okay, we're done here. Katsuki felt Endeavor pull at his shoulders and he turned to continue the walk towards the agency. We've said enough for today. Out of our way. As they left the reporters behind, Katsuki cursed under his breath, before turning to Burnin as they walked. Quote. Guess I'm in trouble now, huh? Running your mouth in front of Chito's Kazuki with the cameras running. I dunno. Burnin shot a deadpan look over to Endeavor. He might not burn you alive immediately. Or out of earshot, Endeavor interrupted, stopping dead in the middle of the road and pointing down it towards the agency. Burnin, get Bakugo back to the agency and wait for me in my office. We need to talk. Am I in trouble? Endeavor looked him up and down. What you said wasn't wrong, and in some ways it's reassured me I picked the right apprentice. You have the same motivation as I do. But the issue isn't what you said, it's who was listening to it, both the commission and others. Others. I'll explain when we're back. Endeavor clapped a hand on his shoulder. All I'll say for now is that there are villains out there in the shadows unlike anything you've seen before. I'll need every bit of your strength if we can defeat them. Then where the hell are you going now? To make a call. I'll be with you soon. Endeavor snapped to his flaming sidekick. Burnin, go. I'll be with you as soon as I can. Yes sir. Burnin turned to Katsuki, tugging at his arm with surprising strength as she hauled him away. Come on Slowpoke. Leave the boss to it already. Katsuki held for just a second, but when he saw the look from Endeavor it sealed the deal, and he began to run after Burnin. Endeavor was usually so implacable, but something had crept into his eyes which was a look he'd never seen before on the face of the number one, no matter how great the adversity. Endeavor was concerned. Just how deep a mess had he gotten himself involved in? Enji Todoroki watched his apprentice and favorite sidekick disappear towards the agency, and let out the breath he didn't know he had been holding in. Bakugo had no idea what he'd just found himself in the middle of, and he had wanted time before he introduced Bakugo to the darkest investigation his agency was involved in, to the corruption at the very heart of Heroes Society. Now he didn't have that luxury. If everything he feared was correct, Katsuki Bakugo had just become a person of interest to them. Fishing his mobile phone from his utility belt, the phone only rang once before it was picked up. Enji. I think I can guess what this is about. Tsukauchi, Endeavor acknowledged, thankful that the most reliable man in all of Japan had picked up. There was no need to waste time with pleasantries with him. Detective Tsukauchi was someone he had known even back when All Might was still alive. Endeavor was rather glad he had his help on this investigation. Did you watch it? If you're talking about your new apprentice's first TV interview, yeah, I did. There was a brief, humorless laugh from the detective. I can't say I'd normally advise declaring war on the Hero Commission, but the boys said what a lot of us are thinking. I can't fault honesty. Did you hear who was interviewing him? Endeavor asked. Kazuki. The one from Shueisha, right? That's her. Did you notice what I did about her? Let's for a moment assume that you and I both know you're not talking about her having blue skin. Tsukauchi made a little noise, and only a few people like Endeavor would know that the man grimaced without seeing his face. Her words. They're instant red flags. Ability and power, but never quirk. Endeavor banged a flaming fist against the alley wall in anger. She's connected to the Meta Liberation Army. It's circumstantial at the moment, but the pause was heavy, pregnant. It's concerning. She might be paid by them, she might be a believer, or she might be a member. Given her experience and networks, if she's a member, she's high-ranking. Either way, she's walking around in public talking about quirks in the language of Destro. Something doesn't add up. There was a low noise as if Tsukauchi was whistling through his teeth. I don't like what you're saying, but it checks out. I'll pull on a few threads. I assume you don't want active surveillance. For now. We need a meeting in the next few days to see what we can find on her before we risk exposing ourselves. I'll have my people look too. Endeavor paused. I'm bringing the boy to the meeting. After comments like that, you may forgive me for being worried he might share their beliefs. He's fierce, but a group like the army are the sort of people he would hate more than anything, Endeavor vouched. Bakugo needs to learn what hides in the shadows, because I think he's one of the few who would still stand firm against them. Emphasis on the few. There was a long pause from Tsukauchi. I'll pull some strings, but we have to be careful how we handle this. Keep your cards close to your chest, Enji. We don't know how far their influence stretches. Agreed. Endeavor nodded. I'll call you, detective. The phone clicked off without a further warning and Endeavor slipped it back into the utility belt, his other fist still aflame and balled against the alley wall. If any passerby saw him, they would think he was despairing, broken, as if something on the phone had completely destroyed him. In reality, he was furious. For the last few years, his investigation into the insidious Meta Liberation Army had thrown up nothing but dead ends. Endeavor had kept it quiet, not informing the public of the group's existence or his agency's investigation, as he tried to piece together the leadership of this great threat to society on his own. But at every turn, zealots and meta-ability fanatics had refused to give him the answers, and the key to identifying the heirs to Destro's throne had eluded him time after time. Now, it was as if they were mocking him, with someone so prominent throwing out all the buzzwords in broad daylight without a care in the world. Society didn't want him as number one. They didn't want him as a hero, full stop. But if he could do one thing before he was replaced, Endeavor vowed, he would wipe the scheming army from the face of the earth. Bad move, he growled to himself. I'm coming for you now. As the blood dripped from his sword, and he heard nothing but whispers behind him, the hero killer found himself enthralled by the display on the television screen. Stain's views on Endeavor were relatively simple, and after all he had heard about the brute's capacity for violence, his lack of empathy, his complete disregard for minimizing the risk of anyone being caught in the crossfire, he had decided. Endeavor would have to be purged, as one of the most guilty of all. But this apprentice of his. This was the child you faced, wasn't it? He asked, not turning away from the TV screen. In Tatuan. Behind him, there was an agonized gasp of a woman in pain. God, that fucking brat. What's he doing, with Endeavor? Even her vapid voice set him on edge. So much arrogance and self-worship. Apparently telling the Hero Commission how to be heroes. What the fu MRPH? Stain didn't have to turn around to realize that Spinner, who had been diligently going through the heroine's files until that point, had stuffed something into her mouth to finally silence her. The fact that she had remained chatty at all in spite of her situation had frankly amazed him. Then again, she was rather known for trying to take center stage. Mount Lady did think she was God's gift to heroics, after all. Her security had been woeful. Himiko had found out that the Titanic heroine used to live in Musudafu, another fortuitous piece of trivia dug from the brain of the Izuku boy she seemed to be pining for, and had tracked down her flat, right on the outskirts of the city away from the tall buildings in the center. From there it was only a matter of speaking to neighbors to find out when she made a habit of returning home, and he and Spinner had simply been able to lie in wait in her lounge and ambush her when she walked through the door. Without the ability to go gigantic in such a confined space, with neighbors living above her, Mount Lady had been no match for a sharpened sword. Paralyzed by his quirk, she sat rigid on her own couch in her casual clothes as Spinner had rifled through her possessions. Stain had been thoroughly unsurprised when a number of police files turned up, unsecured and unread. Her laziness had extended to not protecting confidential information, and now he and Spinner had leads on a number of crime groups in the area, not least the Yakuza they were looking at. She had been a goldmine of a find for them. He really did have to thank Himiko. At one point, Spinner had knocked the television controls and turned it on by accident. It had only been left on as reporters had ambushed Endeavor, and Stain had stayed for the duration in case the Flame Hero added something else to justify his eradication. Instead, Stain had been transfixed as Endeavor's young hero apprentice had been put on the spot and bit back at the questioning, and the answers he had given were confusing. Spinner. The reptilian young man looked up from where he was storing files away into his backpack. Boss. What do you make of his apprentice? Spinner had been occupied, for sure, but Stain knew he had been listening. The benefit of a second opinion never hurt. Kid seems like an ass. Second opinions were a lot more useful if they had substance. I can't quite make him out. His arrogance and desire for glory are appalling, but he stood up to this fake heroine here and her kind. He demanded better. MRMPH. Yeah, I know what you mean. There's something about him. Spinner frowned at the TV. He was willing to break the law and fight because he was pissed nobody was helping. It's not pure heroics, but it's not all bad either. Stain licked another drop of blood from the end of the sword. Better safe than sorry. We will need to test him in future. He could be good, but I suspect he won't be true, in the end. Good plan, boss. Spinner hefted the backpack onto his back. We've got everything. The Yakuza. Her files suggest they've got a supply drop in a few days' time. There's other heroes looking into it, but the commission sent her and Death Arms to look because there's a pro somewhere round here on the take, helping them arrange drop-offs. Another fake to be cleansed, Stain snarled, grasping the sword tighter as he turned to the terrified and wide-eyed Mount Lady. Fakes hunting fakes. What a mess of a system we live in. We've got to go, Spinner urged, looking down at a watch which looked out of place on a scaly arm. We've got 2 minutes before the building security cams come back. What are we doing with her? Stain looked at Mount Lady, and tried not to roll his eyes at the whimpers and pleading looks in her eyes. He'd seen enough to not be fooled by the last acts of the desperate. She's heard too much, but her fate was sealed before today. We're removing one more worthless pretender from the world, Spinner. As is our purpose, the Gecko Man said sagely. Last words. All right. It's only fair, after all. As the rag was ripped from her mouth by Spinner, Stain raised the sword to poke her in her ample and overemphasized chest with its tip. You heard my associate. Mount Lady, I can no longer tolerate the lie that you are a hero, and as is my purpose I act now. In the name of a correct society, I sentence you to die. If you have any last words, speak now. No, please, there must be something I can do. Not the most original. Stain pushed forward and watched the look of shock and horror on her face with disinterest. He had seen it all before, and done it all before, so felt nothing as the sword punctured the blonde heroine, as he watched the trickle of blood that came from her mouth and the way the light fled her eyes as she passed gurgling and undignified into the next world. One more gone, Spinner. Far too many to go, Spinner tutted. Do you still wanna go ahead with the attack on the Yakuza? If other heroes are investigating, we may have a problem. And if we don't act, we may lose their shipment, and the fake hero helping them get it into Musudafu, Stain interrupted firmly. We have no choice but to act. We owe that much to the people here. Yes sir. I'm glad you agree. Stain paused, and nodded to himself. We can brief Himiko when she's back from UA. If she can join us without risking her place, she would be welcome. Hey, got it. Spinner grinned, leading the way out of the door. How do you think she's doing at UA? Stain smirked to himself, stashing the sword inside the long coat he wore and leaving the apartment of the former heroine Mount Lady behind. Oh, we will see. I'm not sure UA was ever going to be ready for her. Katsuki Bakugo. Aged 15. Enji Todoroki, Endeavor. Aged 45. Mokamiji Burnin. Aged 25. Chizome Akaguro, Stain, and Shuichi Iguchi, Spinner. Aged 31 and 20. Okay, here goes. As he sat on the cold hard floor of the main entrance lobby to UA, one arm over Himiko's shoulder, Izuku saw the look on her face and realized just how much what she was about to tell him weighed on her shoulders. There was no anger on her face, no fury flickering in those soulful yellow eyes of her that were staring right through him. This was a look of pain, as if repressing the knowledge of what she could do was the only thing she knew how to do. Izuku loved quirks. He was a fanboy and an enthusiast, a spotter, a nerd. He wouldn't disagree with anyone who tried to tell him that he was obsessed with learning about other people's quirks and marveling at the potential of some. But he had never seen anyone who felt this way about their quirk, anyone who was so reluctant to say what their power was capable of. He had run after her in a heartbeat when she raced out of the classroom in a panic, because Himiko was one of his group no matter how recently she joined them. He had meant everything he said when she saved him and Tenko from being attacked by the Yakuza all those weeks ago, and held on to the firm belief that whatever she thought of herself, she too could be a hero. But they had made it to UA and the idea that her quirk would be on display had clearly terrified her. Whatever the reason was for that, Izuku had to try to help. If there was anything he could do at all to restore her confidence in herself, and let her know how honest he had been with her about his faith in her, he had to do it. It wasn't a question of what it meant to be a hero, it was a question of what it meant to look after the people he cared about. Himiko was hurting, and he had to try to help her with that. Anything for a friend. Himiko took a deep, shuddering breath that Izuku felt wash over her skinny body as she sat there, curled into his side with his arm over her shoulder. Izuku, you've gotta bear with me if this takes a little bit. I'm not used to telling people what I can do. I know. His response was to squeeze her shoulder and look her in the eyes, shooting her a small smile in the hope that it would reassure her that he wasn't going anywhere. However long you need, please take it. Despite the negative emotion that was currently charged up inside her, Himiko found the energy from somewhere to flash Izuku a small smile, her fang-like canines seeming to sparkle for a second. Thanks Izu. Yes, the name would be a good start, huh? My quirk is called Transform. Izuku tried not to make a big deal of the fact that she had let out a big breath when she said its name, as if it was the first obstacle she had overcome. Okay, how does it work? She paused for a second, before nodding to herself. He took that as a good sign, that she had decided in herself that for her to have said this much, she was willing to let Izuku in on the whole truth. I can turn myself into other people. Incredible. What a gift of a power. Izuku ignored the rogue thought that coursed through his head. He didn't know if that was his inner quirk nerd talking, but it was clear things weren't that simple. Oh, other people. So, could you turn into me? I guess I could. But, her eyes flashed with something, a sense of alarm. Izuku, please, I know you promised you'd tell me if it changed how you felt, but I don't wanna lose you. Then I promise I'm not going anywhere too. He squeezed her other hand, the one he was still holding, and his inner teenager tried not to flush bright red that he'd been holding her hand for a while. You're part of our group, Himiko. Whatever you say, you're not gonna lose me. For a brief moment a blush crept back onto Himiko's face. Thank you, Izuku. Yeah, okay. My quirk lets me transform into other people, but I need something from them before I do. Something from them. Why yeah, I need some of their blood, Izuku. Izuku had not been expecting that as her confession, and from the way in which her back tensed as she said it, the way her voice went so small, he could tell that she had just revealed to him the secret she had been holding back on for a long time. Whoa, how does that work? Huh? She tilted her head on her side, almost curious that he had responded like that. You're not scared of me? Should I be? Izuku squeezed her hand again and felt himself fail to control the color creeping onto his cheeks. He didn't care though what he had to say was important, and if in some small way he could stop the hurt she was feeling, he would do his best to make sure he could help. You're you, Himiko. I don't worry when I'm around you. None of us do. I just want to understand. Himiko bit her lip, before nodding. I need to drink someone's blood so that I can turn into them. Whatever I take in turns into energy, so the more I drink the longer I can hold onto the form. A time limit. Izuku's eyebrows creased into a frown as he processed this. How much do you need to make it work? I only need a little bit, Himiko replied, sounding hesitant as she revealed more and more details on how it worked to him. 1 cup lets me look and sound like someone for about, maybe a day. Maybe. She fidgeted beside him. It's been a while since I had that much. You limit what you drink? Izuku asked, not necessarily understanding that comment. I try to. Himiko took a deep, shuddering breath. If I go without it for a while it drives me crazy, though. I get withdrawal symptoms. I get a lot more reckless. How do you? Rare steak, she said, with a dark chuckle. And my guardian knows a guy who can get blood bags for me, you know, like the ones you get in hospitals. There's a lot more in the system these days because there's more villain fights happening, so if some goes missing every so often, I guess you now know where it goes, huh? So, Izuku's mind was racing at the possibilities. Do you have a limit to how many people you can do? Not that I know, Himiko said, although she sounded unsure. I think the most choice I've had was 4 or 5 at a time. But I can't copy their quirks, just their appearance. And that includes clothes, but, oh god, this is embarrassing. Embarrassing. She looked at him with a slight rosy tint to her cheeks. I kinda need to get naked before I transform because their clothes layer on top of my skin. Otherwise I end up looking like a copy of that person in my clothes and it ruins the illusion. Izuku gulped. Oh okay, yeah, I can see that might embarrass you if why you have to get naked. I don't suppose you'd mind. Gah. Himiko giggled, despite everything, before her smile faded. You've taken this better than I thought you would. Izuku shook his head and focused on her with a faint smile. It's a really cool quirk, Himiko. Wait, for real? What do you mean? You're not bugged by the idea of me needing to drink people's blood at all? She asked him, looking a little lost. I mean, Izuku paused, thinking about the words he next used. He had to get them right. I'm not used to the idea of someone needing something like this for their quirk. I didn't think it was possible that quirks would develop like this, but it makes sense for how you would become like someone. She looked at him, and he couldn't read her face. You don't think it's disgusting? And no. I know it's different, but you could do so much with it, it could be a gift for you. He smiled at her, gently, and squeezed her shoulder again. You'd be a great underground hero with a quirk like that. All the undercover work you could do with different people's faces, so many groups and gangs you could get into and break up. You'd be amazing. Huh. There was a strange look on her face. There's only one other person who has ever said something like that to me. My guardian. Others didn't see it. Why would they ever? Because not everyone thinks like you. Her cry was sudden, and took Izuku by surprise. My parents, they thought I was a monster before they died. They tried to get me to go to therapy and the doctors told me I was all wrong because of what I wanted for my quirk, the vicious little vampire. But you're not wrong. Izuku didn't mean for his voice to be so firm, but it had the effect he wanted, as Himiko snapped out of the panicked cry and stared at him. I mean, none of what you do is wrong. Your quirk is different to others, but sometimes I wish I never had it. Izuku, she said, voice trembling as she looked at him. People think I'm a monster because of it. You could help her with that, Izuku. Izuku tried not to show it, but he stiffened just a little at the dark little thought inside his own brain as Himiko told him what she thought of her quirk. He had no idea where it came from, but it was an idea. He hadn't revealed his true powers to anyone besides Tenko and his mother, but he felt he could trust Himiko. He could show her, offer her the chance to take her quirk from her like he had taken the quirk from the Yakuza. She had opened up to him, so maybe he could do the same, and give her the choice to live without the quirk that made people call her a monster. No. He muttered to himself. That wasn't an option. If he offered her that, then what he would be saying to her is that he agreed with all those people. That her quirk was monstrous and a burden, that she should be ashamed of it and look to find a way to live without it. That's not how he felt about her, and that wouldn't help her. How could he ever hope to be a hero if he did that to her? Izuku. She looked at him, eyes wide. What did you mean? No. I don't think you're a monster, Himiko. A monster would have left me and Tenko to be hurt by that Yakuza. A monster wouldn't have believed me when I said you could become a hero. A monster wouldn't be sitting here in Ua with me. He looked at her and settled his voice. Your power is a gift, Himiko. And I really do think you can become a hero with that power. Her response knocked the wind out of his lungs. They had been sat against a wall with his arm over her shoulders, but now she turned and buried herself into him in a hug, deceptive strength in her skinny arms. Izuku could do nothing but awkwardly pat her on the back and feel his green hoodie get slightly damp as she seemed to cry into his chest. He really hoped he had got it right with her. It could have been 30 seconds, or 5 minutes, or 5 whole years, but after what seemed like an age and was probably just a moment, Himiko lifted herself off of his chest and blinked tears out of her bright yellow eyes, meeting his gaze. Thank you, Izu. Or you, cry. Happy tears, promise. She sniffed. Sorry for getting them on your hoodie. He chuckled nervously. I don't mind, honest. Ask Tenko and he'll tell you I cry too much anyway. I'm just glad you're okay. I am. She stared at him, fondly. You're something else, Izuku. Thank you. I'll show them what I can do, for now. And then maybe we can see what they think. Do you have enough blood? Izuku asked, before realizing he interrupted. Sorry, if you wanna show them, do you have enough to show it off? Himiko poked the inside of her cheek with her tongue and pulled a face. I think I've got enough for a couple of faces, yeah. Why? What do you? Izuku's idea in his head was one which a few days ago his brain would have screamed at him for doing. Something about it still seemed alien, unusual, but after all that Himiko had told him and trusted him with, it felt right. He made up his mind, and in response to her question he rolled up the sleeve of his hoodie and held out an outstretched bare arm. Do you want some? Himiko blinked, and stared at him. Izuku, wait, I'm serious. He smiled again, not flinching under her gaze. If that's how you can show off your quirk when you're being assessed and it helps, then why wouldn't I? I trust you, so. Himiko looked from his face to his arm, and back to meet his gaze. Izu, I don't know what to say, thank you. It's the least I can do, right? I would never have asked you, but if you're happy for me to do it, then. Sure. Only, do you mind coming with me into my test when we do it? Himiko asked, shuffling awkwardly. I'm worried. If I say it's your blood I've used to do it, then. You don't want someone to have the wrong idea about it, Izuku finished, working out why she was worried. We can ask Present Mike, sure, if that helps. Okay. Himiko blushed, and brushed some of her blonde hair off of her cheek. There's one other thing. Yeah. It's easier for me to get blood from elsewhere. She rubbed her hand against the side of his neck and moved some of his messy green hair aside, and Izuku's own face went red. So if you're happy, then. I can start here. Although if your mom's never seen a love bite before, she's gonna ask a few questions. Izuku froze. This girl was going to be the death of him if she kept doing embarrassing stuff like this. Oh man. Tenko and Setsuna are gonna love this. And you won't. Himiko teased. He could feel himself going practically crimson at this point, as he realized that from the hug earlier they had ended up with her straddling his lap. Himiko. Don't worry, I won't tell. She rubbed at his neck with a delicate hand and then breathed on his neck, sending a shiver up his spine and setting the hairs on the back of his neck on end. Just relax, okay? It may tingle a little, but trust me, it won't hurt. I trust you. Okay. She flashed a smile at him and Izuku took a moment to appreciate just how much happiness seemed to be in those bright yellow eyes in that moment. It had surprised him how quickly her mood had swung, but he was relieved he had made the difference. Thank you, Izuku. With the slightest of nips that briefly made Izuku wince, he felt her pierce the skin and felt the flow of something wet on his neck. It was strange, and as he sat there on the floor he knew what a sight it would be for anyone if they came out into the corridor and saw them both there like this, Himiko in his lap and humming as her tongue lapped up the small bit of blood she was drinking from him. But even if anyone got the wrong idea, or didn't understand, somehow Izuku was okay with it. He knew the truth, and he was happy with it. He could see the look on her face as she sat there and shifted to nibble at him again, to tease more of the red liquid that fueled her power from Izuku. That look of happiness as she drank made it all worth it. The willpower it must have taken to confide him would have been immense, and he was so glad she did. He vowed then that he would do what it took to help her, to help show all those who said the most awful things about her how wrong they were. Taking her quirk was never an option. Her quirk was not a burden she had to carry or live in spite of, and her quirk did not change who she was. Himiko Toga had a gift, and the potential to be a hero, and Izuku couldn't wait to stand beside her on that journey. She lifted her mouth from his neck, delicately brushing her lips against his skin to make sure it was clean and ensuring that no mess was left behind. Izuku felt the tingle from that contact run down that spine. Hey. I really owe you, Izu. That. He brought his hand up to his neck and brushed where she had punctured the skin. That doesn't hurt like I thought it would. I'm glad, Himiko said, smiling at him with the most shy smile he had seen on her face. You, don't feel too tired. I tried to limit how much I took so I wouldn't affect you for your test. I'm fine, Izuku nodded at her, determined. I just hope you have enough. She giggled, and any question in Izuku's mind as to whether what he had done was the right thing evaporated. It was worth it just for that smile. I'll be fine, Izu. I've got you with me, haven't I? All the way. Right. Now we can both go plus ultra. She flashed him a peace sign before stretching like a cat in his lap, a sensation Izuku's teenage brain found far too enjoyable before an exam. Come on, we better get back before anyone thinks we fled or something. Alright. Let's do this. Izuku took her hand as she leapt up ahead of him, and as they walked back to class he couldn't help but notice the way in which she was suddenly bouncing with each step, humming under her breath, as if the Atlantean weight of her quirk was no longer crushing her. Maybe his actions had shown her that she would be accepted, that she shouldn't fear her own quirk. If he had done that even a little, then Izuku was over the moon. And maybe, just maybe, they'd make it through the exam together after all. Say Izuku, I wonder how Tenko's getting on. I'm here to see what the future holds for you. For a moment in the small UA classroom where his quirk assessment was due to take place, Tenko Shimura stood defiant under the implacable stare of Sir Night-Eye, the pro-hero brought in by UA to assess him and the others. You wanna know what the next mission looks like for me, huh? Night-Eye's yellow eyes, framed by his glasses and always giving nothing away, blinked. Something like that. If I were to use your interesting sense of analogy, consider me the gate guardian, checking that you meet the minimum rank requirements. You game. Tenko frowned. Probably gonna sound rude, but you don't seem the type. I wouldn't say that I am, although I must confess, I do play a fair bit of All Might, Texas Smash. Huh. Unexpected. Tenko allowed himself a little smirk. It was better than Missouri Smash, I'll give ya that. Nothing beats Detroit Smash though. I see you're a fan of the classics. Night-Eye pushed his glasses further up his nose and steepled his fingers, a serious look never leaving his face. But that's not why we're here to talk. Right. You wanna see my quirk. Precisely, Night-Eye confirmed, looking Tenko up and down. I've read the notes in your file. Decay seems to be an interesting quirk, in principle, and one I can't say I've seen in a pro-hero before. First time for everything, right? Tenko replied, although there was something about the way Night-Eye looked at him that made him a little nervous. I'll be the judge of that. Night-Eye gestured to Tenko's hands. I note your gloves aren't entirely fingerless. All 5 fingertips have to touch something in order for decay to be effective, and you've made yourself gloves which prevent you from normally being able to touch anything with all 5 fingers. That's right. Tenko said, hesitant. What are you? Take them off. The blunt way in which Night-Eye said it made it clear he wasn't making a request. I want to see your quirk at work without limits. Tenko complied, but there was something about the way in which the pro-hero appeared to be staring at him that made him feel deeply uncomfortable. Fine, what do you? What I want is simple. Night-Eye strode behind the desk that he had been sat down at when Tenko entered the room, and Tenko was briefly in awe at the height of All Might's former sidekick, a tower of a man. When he got over this, he realized only now that Night-Eye had a number of objects lined up along the edge of the desk. I'm going to see how quickly you can respond with your quirk, and the level to which you can make it take effect. There are a number of items here of varying size and weight to test you on, which I will throw to you, and assess your speed in being able to decay them with your quirk. Does that sound simple enough? Maybe too simple. Tenko couldn't help how wary he felt. Where's the catch? There's usually some Easter egg or hidden requirement in a challenge like this. What gives? That's all I ask, Tenko. Night Eye flexed his fingers and brushed over one of the objects. I will ask some questions, but ultimately I am not going to ask you to fight me, or do something utterly extraordinary. Ua is here to teach you how to fight, to bring out the best in you. I am not foolish enough to expect you to already be at the level of a fledgling pro hero without any formal training. Alright. Tenko wasn't reassured at all by the man's blunt tone, but he nodded. If this was what it took to get in and support Izuku, he could do it. Then let's get this done. Quite so. First object. Night Eye nodded to himself, selecting a small eraser and throwing it underarm at Tenko. Does your quirk have an instantaneous effect? Tenko caught the eraser, pinched it between his fingertips, and smirked to himself as decay turned it to ash in a mere second. Does that answer your question? Night Eye didn't respond immediately, instead making a small note on the paper in front of him. This time he selected a plastic ruler, larger and thicker, and tossed it like a boomerang. Do certain objects hold up longer under decay? This time when Tenko caught the ruler in the middle, the plastic cracked and eroded through, meaning that two halves of the ruler fell from Tenko's grasp to the floor, no longer continuing to corrode into dust without him holding them. Most stuff decays at the same rate, but you can see what happens depending on size, width, mass, you know. Interesting. Night Eye's eyebrows scrunched slightly, and this time he threw a larger tape dispenser underarm to Tenko. I see that your quirk does not continue when you are no longer holding the object. Are you able to cancel at all? Perhaps with the dispenser, you could cancel before the tape. Tenko shook his head, as the whole object crumpled into oblivion. As long as I touch it, decay destroys it. So there is a limit. Night Eye scribbled something further, and then hefted what appeared to be a sealing stamp in his hand. I'm currently holding one of my trademark high-density seals. I use these in my hero work as a means to incapacitate villains. Their mass is far greater than their size would suggest, so perhaps this may provide some challenge. Got it. Tenko caught the seal and tried to act nonchalant, despite the weight surprising him and nearly making him take a step back. What's the question this time? Do you consider your quirk to be dangerous? Tenko was taken aback, especially as he had to concentrate to give decay a little boost to its usual strength, so that he could rot through the seal in his hand. Yeah, of course I do. I have an op-destruction type ability in my fingertips that could really hurt someone. Why would I ever think it's not dangerous? Do you think you can be a hero with a dangerous quirk? Tenko frowned, as the seal succumbed to his quirk at last. All quirks can be dangerous depending on who uses them. Endeavor burns people alive on a monthly basis and he's still our number one. Regrettably, I can't argue with that assessment. Although I am not here to assess Endeavor. Night Eye scribbled something again, not looking at him. Do you think decay is too dangerous for a hero to possess? Why would I think that? Tenko was trying not to let this piss him off, but the anger was creeping into his voice now. My friends believe in me, and I want to make a difference. I'm tired of heroes not doing enough to make people feel safe and I want to help. If I can use decay to do it, then I will. But will you use decay, or will it use you? Hey, what gives? Tenko asked, balling the hand he wasn't using into a fist. What is that supposed to mean, you old? Scrutiny is an important part of the admissions process to this school, Night Eye interrupted, before Tenko could insult him. But to answer your question more succinctly, I want to be sure you're in control of your quirk. In control? Hell yeah, I'm in control. And yet you wear your gloves all the time, to prevent you from touching anything with all 5 fingertips unless you desire. Night Eye scribbled another small note, and grabbed a metal ball the size of an apple from the desk. How do you control decay without your gloves? Tenko caught the ball as it was thrown underarm and made a point to leave his pinky finger pointed away from the ball, and gestured at the pro hero with the intact metal sphere. All 5 fingertips, remember. Yeah, it's easier with the gloves, that's why I choose to wear them, but I can hold back without them. Night Eye sat back in the chair as Tenko tossed the metal ball to the side, watching it thump to the floor with a clang. Anything else you want me to destroy before we're done with your little tutorial quest? Not something to destroy, per se. Night Eye looked over at the last object on the desk, and picked it up. Don't use your quirk on this one. I want you to look at this and tell me what you see. Tenko frowned as Night Eye passed him the object, and stared at it in confusion. What he had been handed was a medium-sized picture frame, no bigger than the average tablet, but containing a photo of a woman. What was strange was that there was something nagging at the back of Tenko's mind as he looked at the woman, a wide smile on her face, soulful black eyes framed by black bangs sticking out of her otherwise straight black hair. Who is this? Interesting, you don't recognize her at all. Should I? Perhaps. She's a former pro hero from a number of years ago. She wasn't necessarily one of the top heroes, so I wouldn't blame you for not knowing immediately. What was her hero name? Night Eye paused. I never knew her hero name. I just knew of her and her real name, and I knew that she was one of the greatest heroes the world never knew of. Her name was Nana Shimura. Nana. At the sound of that name, Tenko didn't know why, but he started shaking, hands trembling as he held the picture frame of the beaming woman. Something ached inside, and he didn't know what. No, surely you're not. Nana Shimura had a child, Night Eye continued, rising from the desk and striding over towards Tenko, a cold pillar of emotional indifference. She gave her child up for adoption in order to fight a villain who took her life, and he never forgave her. All his life, he lived resenting heroes, spreading that message to his family. To his children, to you. Tenko Shimura, son of Kotaro. Grandson of Nana. What the hell is this? Night Eye loomed over Tenko like an iceberg in a suit, cold and imposing. Only your father is no longer alive. Nor are the rest of your family, Tenko Shimura. Only you. Why the hell would you bring up my family? Because you're all that's left of the Shimuras now, aren't you? Night Eye folded his arms. You are the last Shimura left alive, and I find myself concerned by your existence. I have no doubt that you never knew your grandmother, but no trace of your family was ever found after Incident Zero. And yet, here you are, decay at your fingertips, the sole survivor. Tenko was shaking so hard he didn't realize that his pinky finger had now touched the picture frame, the photo of Nana Shimura beginning to corrode in his hands. Get away from me. Night Eye moved to take a step forward, but with only a fraction of a second of warning, Tenko tipped his head back and cried out as if in pain, as the remains of the photo frame clattered to the floor. The older pro took a step back and frowned as the air itself seemed to vibrate around Tenko, and Night Eye realized almost immediately that something wasn't quite right. The hard floor underneath Tenko cracked and withered as if it had been touched by his fingertips, and as the desk in the room shook, a pencil which fell off the edge seemed to hit an invisible barrier in the air and crumbled to dust. A field. Night Eye murmured to himself. His quirk reacted to me. Don't you dare talk about them. Tenko yelled, anguish palpable in his voice, and the floor splintered again with a horrible crack. Tenko Shimura. The shout from Night Eye was barked as if it were an order, demanding his attention. The past is not my concern. Tenko blinked, as the air rippled around him, and seemed to shake off some of the anger that had surfaced in that moment. Then why would you give me a flashback prompt? I'm not here to deal with your secrets, Tenko Shimura, Night Eye said, raising his voice as Tenko grit his teeth and struggled, the air still vibrating as if there was an aura around the boy. Whatever happened in the past will remain a mystery to all of us, and the truth is something I doubt we'll ever fully know. But if you are a threat to anyone in the future, then I cannot allow you to start at this school. Nor can I allow you to leave this room. That is why I'm here, after all. It's as I said to you. Night Eye's yellow eyes suddenly glowed purple as he met the gaze of Tenko, completely distracting Tenko from the thoughts of his family. I'm here to see what the future holds for you. Darkness. A lone man clutching a sword of terrible edges stood under lamplight, and held the sword to the neck of a blue-haired boy. A green-haired young man with freckles and wide green eyes stood by the side of the boy, as a black mass opened a horrendous beaked mouth and screamed like a banshee. The blue-haired stood in the rubble of a wrecked city, tatters in his school uniform as other students stood beside him and tried not to cower in the wake of an aura of overwhelming evil. Bright lights twinkled like stars and sang like angels. I won't let you. All for one. Darkness. Night Eye blinked and staggered, as the air around Tenko seemed to settle and the boy collapsed to his knees, gasping in breaths of air. Ah. I am, apparently out of practice. What? Tenko was in shock, and trying to get his breath back under control. What just happened to me? A downside of my quirk, I'm afraid. Night Eye composed himself, straightened his tie, adjusted his glasses. I cannot go into details, as my quirk is kept from the public's knowledge, but it may have caused your own quirk to respond in stress. My apologies. I did not mean to push you too far. Whatever. Tenko had got his breath back now, and glared at the pro. That better have been worth it. Are you happy you dragged up my family now? I am satisfied, Night Eye responded, eventually, before he picked up a pen and scribbled a note on his page. You may go back to the others and await the results of the assessment. Thank you for the demonstration. Am I calling the next one in? No, thank you. I'll do that myself. Fine. Just do me a favor and spare that person the interrogation, will ya? Tenko grimaced. Weirdest minigame ever. As the door clicked shut behind Tenko, who couldn't have left quicker if he tried, Night Eye slumped into the chair and groaned, reaching into the inside pocket of his jacket for a bottle of eye drops. I should have practiced before I met with him. Eye drops in, he picked up his mobile phone from the edge of the desk, noting with some relief that it had survived the carnage and not been touched by decay. I'm not what I used to be. Within a couple of rings, the phone was answered. Mirai. You are done with the Shimura boy already. Nezu, Night Eye acknowledged, grimacing as he blinked his eyes. My apologies that I have not been able to get as clear a vision as I used to manage. It appears a lack of practice on my part has clouded my foresight. I feared this may happen. Were you? I was able to get some details. And what did you see? If Night Eye didn't know better, he could have sworn he heard Nezu lean forward in his chair over the phone. What happens to Tenko Shimura? He comes to Ua. That much I can be certain of. He wore your uniform. So he's safe enough. I'm not sure. Night Eye frowned. He seems aligned with your students, but he is fated to come face to face with evil. The hero killer, and some awful unknown creatures. I see. Nezu was silent for a second. Very well. There's more, Principal. I heard the name we both feared. His name. Night Eye let out a breath. He names all for one in the vision I saw. He's still alive. Nezu seemed unsurprised, and resigned to this revelation. After all Might did for us, it pains me to hear this. I share the sentiment, believe me. Alright. Thank you, Mirai. It appears if your visions are correct. Set in stone, as always. Then Tenko Shimura must be one of my students this year. That said, I cannot say I hold much comfort in the knowledge that sooner or later, all for one will come for my students. To place them into conflict with an individual like that, I wouldn't wish that on anyone. I cannot offer you my services at UA. Not with my investigations into the Yakuza continuing as they are. Nor would I ask you to forego your work on those, Mirai. Your work in tackling them is a great service to all. Thank you. But as much as I must continue, I will not leave you to face fate with no assistance at all. Night Eye pocketed his pen. I have an assignment this week with a targeted operation towards the Shihasaikai. Perhaps we can meet after my work there is done. I would welcome the opportunity to meet. A clink of china came from Nezu's end of the call, and it was clear the Chimera had just taken a sip of tea. Please, old friend, take some rest for yourself before you assess any more students. I am grateful for your help, but I know that foresight will have taken a toll. I will gratefully take a break before the next one. Thank you, Nezu. Night Eye hung up the phone before hearing from the principal, and just for a moment he took a look at the devastation in the room which had been caused by Tenko, the small piles of ash on the floor, the cracks in the concrete. Well now, he said to himself, turning over to the next page and circling the name of the next student he would be assessing, first Tenko Shimura, and now his friend. I wonder how you will fare, Izuku Midoriya. Asterisk. Izuku Midoriya and Himiko Toga. Aged 15. Tenko Shimura. Aged 17. Mirai Sasaki, Sir Night Eye. Aged 38. Asterisk. The blood dripped slowly into the sink full of water as he fiddled with the staples, and the red bloomed in the water like a flower in spring. Dabi had gotten used to the need to do this the more time he had spent living independently, and the more he had overstretched himself with the use of his power. Cremation had tremendous power and tremendous backlash, as he had learned one fateful day under his father's tutelage, and he had long resigned himself to the knowledge that he would bear the scars in the burned skin of his arms and neck for as long as he lived. But every now and then, the crude staples he had used to stitch burned and peeling skin back together needed replacing, and one thing he hadn't gotten used to was administering this care to himself. No matter how many times he did it, the stitches and staples left more marks, added to the scars he wore. He was a patchwork man, of his own making and because of his quirk. So be it. It hadn't been long since their group had agreed to the heist on Uraraka Construction Limited, robbing the company who had picked up the tab to repair so much of the damage done by Endeavor, and all their preparation had gone relatively smoothly. Despite this, Dabi still found himself a little out of his comfort zone. The company's head office was in some newly developed city in Mie Prefecture, one of the backwaters of the Kansas region, and Dabi was already sick of the local accent. Mercifully, Gentle had taken to the task with good grace and had found them a temporary base in an abandoned apartment block, with separate flats for all of their crew, and Dabi couldn't have been more appreciative of this. While he was grateful that Shoto had come to him all those months ago, the opportunities he had been presented with to tend to his scars and to replenish the dye he drowned his head in had been limited. Shoto knew the truth, and so the fact that streaks of white had started to appear in Dabi's hair hadn't fazed him. There was still a time he remembered his older brother's natural hair. After all, but Dabi hated every moment he caught sight of a hair like that. The sooner he could hide that from the rest of the world, and the sooner he himself could eliminate that callback to his life as Tuya, the better. So Dabi stood and dressed his arms, making the most of having the room to himself and replacing what needed to be replaced. He was so used to it at this point that he didn't wince at all when cold water splashed over the raw skin around the staples, and he was practically numb to the coarse feeling of rubbing the water over the burned skin of his neck and jawline. It was a fact of his life now. The TV had been playing in the background, and Dabi had been grateful just to have some background noise besides the slosh of the water, now stained fully red with the aftermath of his own DIY surgical work. The news headlines seemed to reflect the situation across the whole of the rest of Japan: growing crime rates, local heroes being attacked, questions around shady underground deals which some locals turned a blind eye to. Gunhead was by far the most well-known pro-hero in the region, but Dabi made a mental note of some of the other names that had cropped up. When all was done here, they may be the sort of people he and Shoto might have to visit. He stared into the mirror above the sink, sunken eyes staring back at him and a shine to some of the newer staples in his jawline. Too much work to do in too little time. As he let the water out, gurgling away down the drain, he caught a brief snippet of buildup of the last story of the news report, from the TV behind him. Despite not being willing to answer questions, the number one hero found himself a spectator as his new apprentice made his thoughts clear on the hero commission end. New apprentice? Dabi asked aloud, turning away from the sink to glare at the TV. You moved quickly, father. He shook his head, irritated at the reminder of the fact that Endeavor continued to operate as the supposed pinnacle of their society, the hero everyone should aspire to. However, as he moved over to try to grab the remote and shut off the noise, before Endeavor's awful voice could get under his skin, the apprentice opened his mouth, identified as Katsuki Bakugo. What followed was the most incendiary piece of television Dabi had ever seen, and he couldn't take his eyes off the screen. Dabi had seen enough heroes come in front of a camera and flash a glimmering smile even before he had given up his Todoroki name. There was a way in which they dealt with the media which was almost enshrined in their psyche, a copycat of All Might's way of reassuring the public that he was there, as he had learned from the great heroes before him. No matter how crooked some of the private heroes had got after Incident Zero, even they were able to flash a dazzling grin at reporters and pretend that all was forgiven, that everything would be fine. Either the true heroes smiled, and lied that the world was all right in their hands, or the fake heroes smiled, to cover all manner of blood that stained their hands. Katsuki Bakugo did not smile, he screamed. It was clear that the kid had anger issues, and short of painting it on a billboard behind him, nobody in the world could miss that of the new kid on the block. He fell for the snide tricks of the woman interviewing him left, right and center, and he ranted like an animal off of its leash for the first time in its life, but it was clear he didn't care. He just bulldozed his way through the interview and let his sheer, unbridled fury bleed into every answer he gave. He's just like you, Endeavor, Dabi had muttered, as the most feral growl had come from Bakugo in response to one particularly vicious line of questioning. The anger was practically causing him to vibrate, and Dabi could tell the sort of hero that Bakugo was going to be. One of rage and pride, one who valued the glory of the victory above anything else. Finally you got someone who didn't break and like the way you thought. And yet, Dabi couldn't turn it off. Dabi couldn't bring himself to look away from the boy who had been chosen as a surrogate to both him and Shoto. As he watched and listened to what Bakugo was saying, he heard something different somewhere in the middle of the bile being spewed. He slated the heroes, the hero commission, the idea that a vigilante was someone to be hunted and criticized. He attacked every concept of what their society had become, and the worst part of all of it was that Dabi didn't fully disagree with everything he said. He should have done. This was Endeavor's chosen one, his third-time charm, the kid who he was projecting all of his misplaced desires for both him and Shoto onto. There was all manner of rage in Bakugo's nature, and Dabi should have been disgusted with everything about Endeavor's new heir. But despite this was the same kid who had got himself banned from UA and the Hero Commission for that fight at Tatooine Station. This angry young man had taken on a villain when the Hero Commission and private heroes were too busy fighting each other to claim the credit, had risked everything and flew in the face of the law to do the right thing and protect people. No wonder he was angry at the world, and if he had been punished for his intentions while fakes were allowed to fail those they were supposed to protect, Dabi was with the kid on that one. There was no hope for Endeavor, Dabi was certain of that and had been certain of that for a number of years. Bakugo looked like he shared so many of the characteristics he despised in Endeavor's nature, and Dabi vowed that if he turned out the same as the Flame Hero, Bakugo would have to go too. But maybe. Don't stop thinking like that, kid, he murmured to himself, as the questions concluded and Bakugo was hauled off by Endeavor and that damn annoying sidekick Burnin. Maybe you might turn out alright in the end. Compelling viewing, isn't it? Dabi shook himself at the sound of that voice, and glared at the doorway at the sight of the newcomer. You're supposed to knock, compress. Yes, but as much as Gentle would disagree, sometimes there is benefit to catching people off their guard. The dramatic thief who had agreed to accompany him and Shoto did a little bow with a flourish, from where he had stepped through the doorway into Dabi's flat. He certainly rocked the boat, that boy. Still looks like the sort of guy who would sink the boat as well. Dabi jerked with the remote and turned the TV off. These heroes look more and more like villains each day. Whereas we vigilantes look exquisite as always. Compress was wearing a mask, so Dabi couldn't read his face, but his jovial tone dropped ever so slightly. I wanted to talk to you about our youngest member of the party. Juhio. Please. There's no need for codenames around each other. As much as it's a clever name, Shoto is so much easier. Compress strode past Dabi, ignoring the glare he shot his way, and slid onto the battered sofa. Do you honestly think he can cut it with us? Dabi paused, and felt his blood begin to boil. Quote. What are you asking? Compress shrugged, totally unfazed that Dabi was as incensed by this question as he was. I'm simply concerned for our upcoming job. We've been over the plans 100 times, Compress, Dabi interrupted testily. We don't need to be concerned. The kid knows what he's doing. And yet he may not understand why he's doing it. Compress wagged a finger. You've limited his role to one of supporting us and covering in case someone discovers us, a cameo in the grand scheme of things. The likelihood of anyone turning up that we haven't already accounted for is so low, and yet you want him out of the firing line. Shoto Todoroki, with perhaps the strongest quirk of all of our little quintet, relegated to a minor credit in this performance. Get to the point. Dabi balled a fist and let cremation light a ball of blue fire in his palm. Say what you've come here to say, or don't say it all. You want me not to sugarcoat. Fine by me. I'll say this once, and only once. Compress turned to look at Dabi, and despite the mask not having slits for his eyes, Dabi could sense the older thief's gaze boring through him. You're protecting him too much, Dabi. That hadn't been what Dabi expected. Quote. What we have planned is a heist on a large construction company with ties to Endeavor, the #1 hero. This is a company which we suspects does contract work for some fairly shady private heroes in the business, and may even have links to the underworld, to people like the Meta Liberation Army. This will make us powerful enemies, not least Endeavor, Shoto's own father. Compress shook his head. You can't protect him from all of that. Nor can you protect him from having to do what needs to be done forever. You mean to kill, Dabi realized, thinking out loud. To damage, to hurt, to kill people who get in our way. It is a potential outcome of our job, Compress replied, something hesitant in his tone. Dabi, I know what you can do, I know what you have done. Shoto doesn't know your body count, but I have some idea. That's my decision and my burden, Dabi said, trying to keep his anger under wraps. Shoto doesn't have to bear the two. Quite so. You and I are used to the darker side of this work, and I'm sure that's why you've planned for us to be the front line. Neither of us will shy away if we have to fight someone from going all out, while Gentle and Labrava will. Compress tapped his foot twice. But if we need him to, then we need to be able to know that Shoto can back us up, that he won't hesitate. If he did, then he'd risk himself and us. I won't have him become like me, Dabi interrupted, bluntly, and he shocked himself with how forcefully it came out. The kid still wants to be a hero. As he holes up with us, ready to take on a grand corporate theft. Compress scoffed. And you still think he can be a hero? I gave up on that idea a long time ago. Dabi paced to the other side of the room, picking at one of his fresh staples which had started to flare up as his blood pressure rose. He doesn't have to. He still wants to do the right thing, and I know that if he could, he wouldn't join us on this. Strong principles. You must be so proud of his character. He'll go far. If this is what it takes to take on Endeavor, then he and I will both do it, we don't have to go to the same lengths. Dabi stopped picking at the staple and stared at Compress. He can still be a hero. If this were any other situation, I would call you unbearably naive to believe that. And why is this any different? Why not just come out and say it? Dabi was aware that his flames had intensified in his palm. Now he would need to dress this after Compress left. Why is this different? Oh, I'm far more forgiving when I see a relationship like yours. Compress clapped his hands, and something in his tone became almost smug behind the mask. The bond between brothers can be thicker than blood, after all. Cremation fizzled out in his palms out of shock. Quote. What did you say? Oh my, did I strike a nerve? Compress asked, leaning back and putting his booted feet on a coffee table. I merely wished to state how much I admire your fraternal instincts. I didn't know you had this side to you. What the hell are you talking about? Please, let's not pretend as if I'm a fool, Dabi. Why else would Endeavor's son seek you out when he ran away from home? Why else would you, a hardened vigilante with a body count the length of my arms, take in a fresh-faced boy with no experience of our side of the world and let him tag along with you? Why else would you be so determined to shield him from the worst of what we have to do? And why else would you both share such an ardent hatred of Endeavor that can only come from blood? Compress shrugged, overly dramatic in his gestures, as if what he was saying were a pity. Gentle is easy to misdirect, since he's so fixed in his ways and his own ideals. He'll overlook anything if you make it easy enough, but me. I'm a performer, so I can tell when there's something below the surface of a character, something I'm being led to not see. I do it enough to people myself. Quote. Dabi struggled to respond. I knew you were a fantasist, Compress, but I'm also very astute, the older man interrupted, with a sound that could only be the huff of a smirk. Let's not do this dance all day. Tuya Todoroki. Dabi couldn't help it, but the ball of flame in his palm from cremation erupted, and with a cry he threw it across the room to incinerate a wardrobe rather than let the rage at the sound of that name on another's lips push cremation to uncontrollable levels. I'll show you how to dance, Seiko. Whoa, easy. Compress displayed impressive reflexes to jump upright from the sofa and back away from Dabi as he advanced. No need to take it out on me or any of the furniture, I don't mean harm. Quote. With a titanic effort, Dabi quelled the anger burning inside him and clenched his fist to prevent sparking up cremation again. Quote. Fine. Now, your reaction tells me all I need to know. Compress stretched himself as if he'd just woken up. You don't need to worry. As far as I'm concerned, your name is your name. Dabi is the only name I need, Dabi growled, aware how much anger was creeping into his voice now. The only one who gets to call me otherwise is Shoto, and if anyone does find out I'll burn you where you stand. Code names only, strictly professional, I assure you, Compress replied, although some of the smugness at his discovery still lingered in his voice. But I have to give you a reality check, in the interests of being professional with you. There's only so much you can do before you fail, Dabi. Dabi folded his arms and huffed. What do you mean? I mean that the world we're in is not kind. You may wish to preserve Shoto's kindness, give him every chance to become a hero the other side of this, but the world might not let you. Compress clapped a hand onto his shoulder, and Dabi couldn't help but inwardly flinch that at any point the older man could activate his quirk and turn him into a marble on a whim. That might not be a bad thing for both of you, in the long run. How? He glared at the thief. Why shouldn't I try and protect him? You both want to get back at the same man. You have become a scourge in the underworld to fake heroes, and an ally to dangerous criminals. You could bring him so much shame anyway by the very virtue of your existence, but Shoto could do it tenfold. If he became just like us, willing to perform a different role to the one endeavor wanted for him, then the shame and agony that both of you could cause your father may destroy him anyway. Dabi opened his mouth to reply but paused, as what Compress had said sunk in. He hadn't thought about it that way when he had agreed to take Shoto in, but there was at least some merit in what their co-conspirator for the heist had said. Maybe it would have been for Shoto's benefit to see things in that level, to not get the chance to shy away from having to make the tough decisions or do the dirty work. Maybe if he learned what it took to make it as far as Dabi had in a world like this, Shoto could be every bit as ruthless and efficient and dangerous. That really would hurt Endeavor more than anything. But this was Shoto. His brother. No. Compress mask gave nothing away, but if he could see the man's face, not that he ever have, Dabi would have put money on him raising an eyebrow at that. You don't think so? I think you're right. But, because it's your brother, you don't want me to be right. Realization dawned on the well-dressed thief. Or rather, you don't want to see it at all. Yeah, that. Dabi never felt nervous, or embarrassed about anything, but for a brief moment he looked out of the flat window over the city below, and turned his back on Compress. I want to hurt Endeavor. He deserves to pay for what he did to us, let alone what he's done to the rest of Japan since he became number one, what he's turned a blind eye to. He picked at one of the older staples on his left arm, and realized he would have to do it again in a week's time. If Shoto wanted to go that far to hurt him too, then I would be okay with it. But the kid wants to be a hero, still, despite everything. He ran to me because he was tired of being hurt, and because he wants to get back at dear old dad, but you know, he doesn't have it in him to kill someone, or hurt them like we can. He's going to find out the hard way, sooner or later, Compress warned, fiddling with a cuff on his hideous orange blazer and walking towards the door. At some point he will be exposed to a choice he can't run from, and there's nothing you can do about it. Even as his brother, you cannot spare him from every evil in this world, or every dent to his morality. I know. But I can at least try for now. Dabi didn't say it, but he left it hanging in the air. Whatever it took to keep Shoto on the cleanest path through life, he would do it. No matter how much hard work or what he would have to do himself, Shoto had the gifts and the desire to make a great hero even despite his circumstances, and while Dabi would willingly accept his assistance as a vigilante, he knew he had to go to the ends of the earth itself to keep Shoto from crossing the lines he had a long time ago. Shoto deserved a way back, and a hopeful future. If he could at least give that to his brother, then it would all be worth it to Dabi. Mr. Compress stared him up and down for a second in the doorway, before nodding, a gesture which threatened to dislodge the obnoxious top hat he wore. Dabi still didn't understand why he was fully dressed up in smart clothes, mask and hat around the rest of the crew, but he didn't waste energy questioning his eccentricities. Alright. Warnings aside, it's clear you would do whatever it took for Shoto. I trust he does the same for all of us when the chips are down. He will, Dabi replied, convinced. Shoto really hates losing. Trust me, he won't hold back. I'm rather glad to hear it. Compress beckoned. Come now, my friend. If we are to do this tonight, I'm sure one last run through our plans can't hurt anyone. He had a point. The plan had been something which had been examined, reassessed and amended consistently for over a week, but it was one Dabi was proud of for its simplicity and for maximizing the potential of all of the members of their little crew. The one thing it needed was certainty that everyone understood it. Shoto had never done anything like this and he had never worked with Gentle and La Brava before. It couldn't hurt to ensure they all went over their roles one last time. Quote. Fine. Lead the way. With a nod, Compress bowed out of the apartment, holding the door just long enough for Dabi to duck out and let it click shut behind him. The last I saw when I left them, Gentle was trying to educate young Juhyo. I'm sure he's been in good hands. Compress. Dabi. Dabi nodded at the use of the correct name, and tried not to let his satisfaction show. I meant what I said. Which part? If you tell anyone that name I will turn you to ash. I don't doubt it. Although, there was a hint of mirth in the rogue's voice now, and if Dabi could see his eyes he knew they would be twinkling. I would like to see you try and get the drop on me. We both know I'm faster. Dabi rolled his eyes, trying not to let the small smirk escape onto his face. Don't think you want to test that any time soon. Perhaps not. They rounded the corner at the end of the hall and slid through the door into the apartment Gentle and Labrava had claimed as their own, only for Compress to come to a complete standstill. Oh. Well. This is not what I expected. Huh? Dabi asked, confused. What do you? When he looked into the apartment, the sight that he was met with was something that would never leave his head as long as he would live. I'm not sure I get this, Shoto said, hesitantly, holding a fine china cup of steaming hot tea out in front of him, holding his ring finger out and looking completely nonplussed. Gentle's mustache quivered, a look of agony on his face as Labrava rolled on the sofa laughing her head off. Pinky finger, Juhyo, not ring finger. How do you even manage to hold a cup of tea and drink from it with that finger out? Why? What do you mean, why? Why do we raise our pinkies if we're drinking tea? Class, my dear boy. Class is everything. Quote. Sure. Shoto put his tea down and stared into its contents as if searching the universe for its soul. Quote. But why the pinky finger? Gra. Labrava, help me out here for goodness sake. What the hell is going on? Gentle jumped at the sound of Dabi's voice in the doorway, and Shoto nearly spilled his tea as he tried to pick it up again. Dabi. Capital timing. I'm trying to teach Juhyo some proper manners but he just can't get the hang of it. I just don't understand. Shoto took a sip of his tea, ring finger still pointed out. And why is it called Earl Grey? Ah, you see. I'll help both of you out now, Dabi interrupted testily, snatching the cup of tea from his younger brother before any further damage to his sanity or Gentles could be done. We're not talking about tea now. Compress chuckled behind him. As much as I was enjoying it, Dabi is right. We came to talk tactics. We're going over the plan again. Labrava groaned like a petulant high schooler from the couch. Seriously. We've done this 10 times in the last few days, our roles haven't changed a bit. You're the one who we're all counting on anyway, Compress. Do you doubt my performance capabilities, young lady? I feel offended. Please, Dabi groaned through gritted teeth, staring at the madhouse that was their little crew and his bewildered little brother. Not the time. Okay. Right, got it. Labrava responded, almost a little sarcastic with how chipper her response was to him. So, Juhyo, want to start us off? Shoto blinked at the use of his name, seeming to come back into the room. Right. Okay. So if I'm right on this, the whole plan starts with Compress. Asterisk. Shoto blinked, pacing the corridor he had been assigned to patrol within Uraraka Construction Limited, and tried to make sense of the blur that had been the execution of the plan that had got him to where he was right now. Tuya had introduced him to the thief Mr. Compress as an old acquaintance, but Shoto knew of his powers even before reuniting with his long-lost brother. Atsuhiro Seiko was renowned for a series of high-profile thefts carried out with bombast and glee by a man who loved the spotlight, and his quirk, as Compress called it, his finest magic trick, had been finally cracked by some of Endeavor's sidekicks, who had fruitlessly pursued the thief before losing him off the grid completely. His power had been the key to all of it. Compress had the ability to turn whatever he touched into a little blue marble-like sphere. It turned out this power worked on people pretty well. Compress could turn marbles back into people by clicking his fingers and snapping them back into reality immediately. Breaking into Uraraka Construction Limited had been child's play when using a power like that. Shoto had helped the nice girl, Labrava, track the security guards in the week before they planned to strike. Working out a rota of who started when had been very easy even without the analysis training he had received from Kido and his Fath endeavor when he was growing up. One of them, who Compress said looked very similar to him, Shoto had never seen under the mask, so he had no clue if this was right, had been easy to track to his home, a solitary apartment where Gentle and Tuya had ambushed him and taken his uniform and key card. From that point it had been easy. For a company so large and with such substantial turnover, their security detail was tiny. Shoto found himself asking why they thought they were so safe that they only needed 3 guards in the whole building on the night shift. Ambush had not been a difficult task even for him, with no field experience of this sort of thing, and it had made their job 10 times easier when they executed their plan that night. All he had needed to do was let Compress's hand came down on his shoulder, and all of a sudden with a click of fingers Shoto suddenly found himself inside the building with his brother and their crew half an hour later. It was as easy as that. His brother and Gentle had taken a guard each and knocked them out cold, and he had watched intently as Compress had stashed them away as marbles. Best to keep them away until we're done, the older thief said, and Shoto could almost hear the wink. It was okay though, Shoto reassured himself. Compress would let them out when they were done, so that was good. The guards wouldn't be harmed. The plan from there had been simple. Tuya had accepted early on that La Brava and her computer knowledge would be the linchpin of their plan. Getting her into a secure location was the most important thing, so that she could act undisturbed and hack the company networks. By sheer luck, the large vault for the company and their central computer link terminal were on the 5th floor, the same floor, that made the next bit even easier. As La Brava wormed her way into the camera feeds and shut them off, Gentle had used his elasticity quirk to turn the stairs to some form of slippery rubber, effectively creating slides which couldn't be climbed up. Compress had used his quirk on the one elevator that ran up the office block, blocking off that route to get to the 5th floor, and then they had presumably got to work. Gentle was to protect La Brava as she downloaded data from their files, while Tuya and Compress made their way to the vault to break it down. That was the plan, anyway. Really, Shoto didn't know what was going on up there. Tuya had told him to patrol the downstairs after the stairs were elasticized and the lift stopped, and alert them if any guards came to check on their colleagues, or if the police had been called. He didn't know why patrolling an empty building was necessary when they had compressed the 2 remaining guards, and he couldn't get the earpiece they'd given him to work, but Tuya seemed to think it was important he was down there, and that he had iced up the bottom of the elasticized stairs. If it was important, he was doing it. At least he was out of the way here. Tuya and the rest could get on with what they needed to do. Shoto grunted as he walked along a long corridor on the 3rd floor, and scratched at his scalp. There was still a bounty on his head, so Tuya and Compress had insisted he wore something to hide himself. Shoto found himself in a white mask left spare by Compress which covered his face, and a ragged black hoodie over the top of his hair. The mask didn't fit his face properly, being made for another person's features, and the hoodie itched like nothing else. Shoto was not comfortable. Not long now, he muttered to himself, hopefully. La Brava's only response when he asked how long she would take with the Uraraka construction computer security was to laugh, so he assumed that was a good thing. Maybe that meant they would get out of there sooner rather than later. He hoped so. Shoto didn't feel comfortable at all, and not just because of the mask. He wanted to get back at Endeavor, truly he did. He wanted to stop people from seeing Endeavor as some sort of pinnacle of heroes, and see the scumbag he knew and had been raised by. And their plan was good, because it would help with that if people knew the extent of damage which had been covered up for Endeavor, how much hurt he had caused by going overboard fighting villains, then Shoto was all for it. He just didn't know how to feel about this way of doing it. Breaking in and attacking guards. Stealing whatever money they could get their hands on. He didn't want to talk back to Tuya, because Tuya had taken him in when he ran away from home and had kept him safe, but Tuya was willing to go a lot further than he ever thought his brother would do. It was complicated. Dang it. Shoto's head whipped up as he heard a very unfamiliar voice coming from the large conference room on his right. He didn't recognize that at all, and nobody else was supposed to be in the building besides the security staff. He should probably check out the problem. Tuya would not be happy if someone got in the way or stopped them from doing what they came here to do. Shoto inched over to the door and tried to peer through, but predictably the mask he had been wearing preventing him from making anything out through its tiny eye sockets. He didn't know how Compress saw anything out of it, so Shoto lifted the mask off and clutched it to his side, his finger very briefly running over that all too familiar scar on his face. On the plus side, finally he could see. He was very confused at what he saw though. There was a girl in there, brown hair framing a wide face with big brown eyes gazing intently at a number of objects. These objects, Shoto realized, were a variety of bits and pieces of DIY equipment, and she had them all levitating in the air, hovering off the ground between 4 and 6 feet off the floor. There were paint cans, a full toolbox, individual tools and even a stepladder in amongst the cloud of objects. Was this a quirk? She had her hand outstretched, and Shoto could see some strange shaping to the end of her fingers, almost like pads, and was intently concentrating on the nearest object to her, a floating handsaw. Okay. You can do this. You can make them float, so you can make them fly, right? How hard can it be? Her country dialect was thick, and Shoto found himself leaning into to concentrate on what she was saying. Her quirk was making these objects float in the air. She was training herself after hours it seemed, and from what she said she wanted to see if she could do more than just float them. Did that mean she was permanently able to leave them hanging in the air? Could she not apply force to them like some telekinetic quirks he had seen? Curiosity at seeing this strange new quirk puzzled him. Shoto chose that moment to lean heavily on the door, and unfortunately for him, it chose that moment to decide it was enough to open further. With a treacherous thunk and the creak of hinges, it slid forward to open more. Shoto tried and failed to not go with it, but found himself stumbling forward into the room with a crash. In response, the girl looked up and panicked, slapping her hands together with a cry. Somehow Shoto caught that she slammed all of her fingertips together, an act which seemed to release the objects in the room from their hovering and send them earthbound with an almighty clatter. Now he had her attention. This was not good. Hi. She giggled. Hi to you too. Sorry, ya kinda surprised me there. I think I surprised myself too. What was he thinking? He had no idea what to say to her and shouldn't be speaking to her anyway. Why was he carrying it on like a normal conversation? Are you one of the new guards here? I thought you guys were either supposed to be downstairs or on the 5th floor. Shoto hesitated. Yes. I am new. I am lost. This building is confusing on my first shift. He hated improvisation. If you can point me to the stairs, I'll leave you. It takes some time. Don't ya worry. I still get lost trying to find the right department when we have meetings. She blinked, and looked him up and down properly for the first time. Wait, didn't ya say you were a guard? I did. Shoto asked aloud. I mean, yes, I did. She trailed off, and the smile on her face seemed to fade, her flushed cheeks beginning to pale. Then, where's your uniform? Improvisation really was not his strong point. I left it at home in the wash. Yeah, you're, The girl's country accent was thick, and her eyes were wide now with fright. You're not a night guard, are ya? No. Shoto shuffled awkwardly under her stare. Wait. The girl's eyes flicked down to the mask Shoto had been clutching in his hands, and Shoto only then realized he'd shown his face to the girl. The horror he felt then increased tenfold when her gaze flicked up to his face. No way. I've seen ya on the news. They ran all those stories about you. You're Shoto Todoroki, Endeavor's son. Shoto knew with a scar like his he couldn't lie. Nobody would leave him. I am. Oh help. Why is Japan's most famous fugitive breaking into our office? What is going on? I'm sorry, who are you? Shoto asked, out of genuine confusion. He had no idea who this girl was. Ochako Uraraka, she announced, before clamping a hand over her mouth in shock at the fact she had answered him without hesitation. Oh god, why did I do that? Some guy just breaks into our office and I'm gonna give him my name like it doesn't matter. You're an Uraraka? Shoto asked, light dawning on him. But you're my age. Your parents, are they the chairman and chairwoman? Ochako hesitated, but it seemed her honesty was unfailing. Yeah. Mom and dad don't know I'm here, but this is our company. I see. Please don't hurt anyone, you don't have to do anything. If you want any of the blueprints or any of our archive data to take to sell, it's on the 5th floor. I'm not here to harm you, Shoto interrupted, trying to reassure her and stumbling over his words slightly. Please, I don't want to hurt anyone. Then how come you're here? Endeavor's son, the one they have bounties out for, breaking into our office. This is so weird. Shoto's brain screamed at him that enough was enough. This Ochako girl had already seen his face and identified him, which would be trouble for Tuya and everyone else if she was able to get clear and call the police. He had already made enough mistakes showing himself, engaging with her, letting his guard down, for all he knew Tuya and the rest. Despite this and against all better judgment, Shoto's big heart, the one that screamed at him how much he wanted to be a hero, told him that she seemed nice. She seemed like she would be good to talk to. It screamed at him and made him sit down cross-legged on the floor in front of the girl. How long do you have to talk? Huh. I'll tell you everything I can. Shoto patted the floor and immediately questioned why in his own head. If you tell me why you're here and what you're doing here, I'll tell you what happened to me and what I'm doing here. Does that sound fair? It was a stupid idea. It made no sense. He had no idea why he had suggested it when he had already told her enough, and yet, he found Ochako sitting down hesitantly opposite him. Okay. Are you gonna go first or me? Shoto hadn't planned that far ahead. I can go, but I just want to warn you. It's quite a long story. ******. Dabi and Juhyo, Tuya and Shoto Todoroki. Aged 25 and 15. Ochako Uraraka. Aged 15.